But I want to welcome everyone to our forum. It is an Assembly Republican forum, but I am very pleased to say that we have a bipartisan show here. Assemblyman Fahey has joined us, and we're very glad of that. And yay, Pat. And Assemblyman John McDonald will be joining us shortly, probably around 7. He's at an event down in Troy. He's going to try to get up here as soon as he can. And then I'll introduce all the members of the panel, and then we will get underway. We have a couple of special guests will be joining us via Skype, which I think you'll find very interesting, one from California and one from Massachusetts. Both of them were on the evaluation committee of the Common Core, and both, I believe, refused to sign off on it. So I think you'll find their presentation really interesting. And we also have someone in person here who will be joining us, Lainey Hameson. I think, is Lainey here yet? I don't know if Lainey's here yet, but she'll be here shortly. Lainey is an expert on data mining and what's going on with all of the uploading of our kids' data to InBloom. So I just want to take a moment and just a couple quick thank yous. I want to thank Hudson Valley for hosting us here tonight, and Drew Matnack, the president of Hudson Valley, is always a good friend, and just really thankful to them for providing us this beautiful space tonight. So all the folks at HVCC, we thank you very much. To all the IT folks, thank you for setting everything up. The live stream, we are live on the web, so there'll be folks watching us, and then we're going to podcast this as well. So I want to thank the IT people. Our public affairs folks down at the Assembly are terrific. They did a great job for us of getting all the data, all the material printed, and helping us spread the word to the press. We thank the press for being here as well. Mary Ann, Josh, Dan, Kathleen, Nancy, Tom Grant, thank you all very much. And to my staff, where's Jennifer? Jennifer, thank you for all your hard work on this. So. And most of all, I want to thank the parents for being here, and the teachers, and all the concerned citizens. I think we're going to, and mostly tonight, we're not here to talk, we're here to listen as much as we possibly can, and hear from all of you. So just to take a moment and introduce everybody, to my right here is Al Graff. Al Graff sits right to the left of me in the chamber. So, you know, Al is no shrinking violet, that's for sure. Al is pretty much outspoken. I think everybody on this panel is pretty outspoken, but Al sits right beside me in the chamber. We have a great time there, and but we also hit pretty hard a lot of times in that chamber. So I'm thankful to Al for taking the drive up here from Long Island. Al has sponsored the bill in the Assembly to remove New York from the Common Core. I thought many of you would like that. And y'all know Jim Tedisco. Jim's been on the scene for a long time, but just as feisty as ever. Jim Tedisco from Schenectady. And we're really happy that Jim was able to make it over. Now, Jim has to leave sometime around 6:45, 7 to get to another event, but we're thankful that Jim was able to make it, and for all of his advocacy and hard work. To my left, my friend Pete Lopez here. Pete and I share some of Columbia County together, and then Pete really shares most of the rest of the state. I think Pete has a district that's as big as Rhode Island, so thank you, Pete, for being here. And Ed Ra, another good friend from the Assembly. Ed's up from Long Island. Ed is the ranking member. Ed's the ranking minority member on the Education Committee, and I think everybody up here is on the Education Committee, right? You're on it, Pat? Okay, so Pat and Jim are not, right? But still fierce advocates for our kids' education. But Ed, Pete, myself, and Al are all on the Education Committee. But whether we're on that committee or not, we're all fighting for our kids down there. So, Ed, thank you very much for being here. Now, this, for Al and Ed, they have been traveling the state. This is their 11th forum that they've held throughout the state. So I think they're far outpacing the Commissioner of Education as far as listening to the people of New York State. So I want to thank you both for taking the time and taking the long drive up here. And Pat Fahey, our colleague from Albany. Pat. You know, Pat, also a very fierce advocate for education, and Pat is a past school board member, so she really understands it. Not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. So thank you, Pat. Now, Pat has to leave in a little bit. She's going to stay as long as she can, But for all of us with kids, you will understand one of her kids has a concert tonight, which we know we cannot miss those, right? So family comes first. So thank you, Pat, for being here. So I think we'll kick it off here. Does anybody want to say anything real quick? Welcome. Are we good to go, or you want to say hello? Or? Yeah, yep.
Just quickly, as Steve said, this is the 11th forum that the Assembly Minority has sponsored. We've been all over the state, and it's really been a listening tour. We have been trying to do this in such a way to make sure anybody who wanted to speak to us had the opportunity to come forward, say what they wanted to say without really being rushed along or anything like that. So with that in mind, we hope that everybody who wants to speak tonight has the opportunity. We just ask you to, especially if you're submitting something in writing, do your best to summarize it so that we get to everybody else. But this is an emotional issue. This is an issue about our children. So we understand that people have a lot to say about it, and we want to hear every bit of it that we possibly can. So I thank all of you, because what has made these successful throughout the state is the involvement of the teachers and the parents and other people in education who care about what's going on, and they want to see positive changes made for the betterment of our children and our schools. So thank you. It's great to be here with my colleagues.
Just to make a quick note, and my name's Pete, and I represent Mid-Hudson, Northern Catskills, Southern Tier, so 7-county region. And I've been fortunate to work with my colleagues here on both sides of the aisle. We've been at meetings where we've had thousands of people, meetings where we've had small working groups, 10, 12, 15 people. But I think the overarching premise is we all realize education's on shifting sands. And it's anything from financial cutbacks, gap elimination, dealing with the pressures of the property tax cap, race to the top mandates. Our challenge is what are we doing to stabilize education? So fiscally, programmatically, and also provide more flexibility so our schools can do what they need to do, and that's to educate our children and make them productive citizens in our state and nation. So thank you for letting me join you, and I thank our colleagues for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. So I think what we're going to do at this time is bring up one of our special guests, and I'm going to bring up Tim Farley to introduce her. Tim, come on up. Now, Tim.
Just to let you know, the forum, the way that we've done it, is we try to set it as a conversational tone. And before that, like you'll hear me, I'll ask some questions. So if you come up here, it's helpful to know what perspective you're coming from. Because we want to hear your story, how this is affecting your child, how it's affecting your home, your classroom, or your school. So depending on what perspective you're coming from, there are certain questions that I may ask you that we've talked to people all around the state. We're going to be putting together a report. So this is more of a conversational thing. So I'd like you to be comfortable when you're talking to us. We're just having a conversation here. And if you have a problem, I know I have a heavy Long Island accent, and I'm sure my colleagues would be more than willing to translate for you if you don't get it, all right? So with that,
all the time in the chamber. So thanks, Al. So yeah, I think when everybody comes up to speak, come on up and sit where Tim is and talk to us and let us know. If you can't make the stairs, let us know. We'll bring the mic down to you. But it really is set up as a conversation. So Tim Farley, most of you know him, a lot of you do. Tim is principal down at Ichabod Crane. Did you guys have school today, or was that canceled? Tim, that's just the inside joke.
We actually had school today.
Do you know, I just want to make a quick point. There's an urban dictionary out there, and Ichabod Crane is now a term for when you close something at the slightest hint of bad weather.
The picnic got Ichabod Craned the other day due to the suspected rain. No,
we love Ichabod Crane.
Yes.
Tim Farley's a principal down there, a fierce advocate for his kids and the kids across this state. And I'm proud to call him a friend, but Tim is here tonight to introduce Lainey Hameson, so I'll turn it over to Tim, and then Lainey will give her presentation on data mining. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. And I'd actually, before I begin, I just want to thank everyone that's here tonight. I really appreciate you coming out and actually listening. It's refreshing. It's an honor and an absolute privilege to introduce our first guest speaker this evening, Lainey Hameson. Lainey is the Executive Director of Class Size Matters, a nonprofit parent advocacy group working for smaller class sizes in New York City and the nation as a whole. She was a public school parent for 15 years, co-founded Parents Across America, and is a board member of the Network for Public Education, a national organization started by Diane Ravitch. Recently, she has spearheaded the battle against the state disclosing personal student information with a corporation called InBloom, and through InBloom with for-profit vendors without parental consent. She is a graduate of Harvard University, worked as a parent advocate at the Educational Priorities Panel, and started Class Size Matters in 2000. She regularly speaks before parent advocacy and government groups and has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox News, and on national radio shows. In 2007, she received the John Dewey Award from the United Federation of Teachers. In 2009, she was named as one of New York City's Family Heroes by NYC Family Magazine. And in 2013, she was honored as an extraordinary advocate for our children by Advocates for Justice. Please give a warm welcome to Lainey Hameson. Lainey.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, honorable gentlemen and gentlewomen. I'm very pleased to be here. I started as an education advocate focused on the issue of class size, but got very upset and worried about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when I found out about this project, and it's taken over my life overwhelmingly like nothing else in many years. So I'm going to take you quickly through what I've learned, in a very difficult fashion over the last year and a half, because as you probably realize, the State Education Department is not very forthcoming with information to parents and other groups. And in fact, really didn't want to talk about this at all. So let me see if this works. All right, so I'm going to take you through the quick timeline. In May 2011, the State Education Department sent a letter to the State Controller asking approval of a no-bid contract to build their state longitudinal system to wireless generation. Now, as you may or may not know, wireless generation is now owned by Rupert Murdoch and run by Joel Klein, who was the former chancellor in New York City. And at about the same time this story broke, so did the story of the scandals over in UK with the phone hacking of the Rupert Murdoch with a dead child's cell phone, et cetera, and stealing a lot of very private information. For that reason, and because of conflict of interest problems, many groups, including Class Size Matters and the State Teachers Union, decided that this was an inappropriate contract and started a campaign. And the State Controller, to his credit, did not approve this no-bid contract and said because of privacy concerns, they didn't want to have wireless generation on having our children's most private data. And then what happened in less than 6 months later was that the state decided to give the contract to the Shared Learning Collaborative, and the regents voted to approve it without letting them know that the operating system for the Shared Learning Collaborative was also being built by wireless generation. And I've spoken to regents who said they would have never approved that if they'd known their involvement. But because no money changed hands at that point, the state controller nor the city controller had any right to register or reject the contract. Let's see. Okay, so did I go past? Yeah, so about a year ago, I'd been asking the State Education Department for this contract ever since I heard about it, and of course they never respond to my emails, so they didn't give it to me. So I decided that we had to take further action. So I called up a friend of mine named Norman Siegel, who's a famous civil rights attorney, and I said we need to have a press conference about this because we need to get our hands on this contract and we need to let people know what's going on because the state wasn't telling anyone. And so we had a press conference, we got some good coverage, and they sent the contract to a reporter who sent it to me. But in the letter that we released the same day, we said, we really think you need to hold public hearings. We really think you need to tell parents exactly what you're doing with this data, what the purpose of it is, who is it's going to be shared with, for what purpose, and allow them to either opt out or consent to this. And the state at that point, more than a year ago, said they didn't need to hold any hearings because this was already public knowledge, what they were doing, because it was mentioned briefly and ambiguously in an agenda on a region's memo on the website. And I can tell you at that point, nobody pretty much outside a very small circle of people knew what was happening. I started reaching out to school board members and superintendents and elected officials in New York City, both at the city level and the legislative level, and there was not a single person who had ever heard of this, and I must say that most people did not believe what I was telling them. I also crashed a shared learning collaborative, a learning camp in New York City, where they quickly realized that I was a person of interest and took me separate. And this was run by the Gates Foundation, and I learned more from the woman who was running that camp than I'd ever learned from the state, including, yes, they wanted all our data, all our children's data, and they didn't think that parental consent was appropriate. In February, the Shared Learning Collaborative became In Bloom Inc. It became a separate corporation. And then it kind of launched. It had its big first public launch at a South by Southwest conference in Austin, which is where a lot of the high-tech companies meet. And I finally got a national reporter, to write about it, because all the other reporters said to me, first they said, no, it can't be happening. They can't be sharing personal information without consent. That would be illegal. You must misunderstand this. And I said, no, check it out. And then they'd come back to me and say, well, you're right, but what's wrong with that anyway? So Stephanie Simon of Reuters was the first person to believe me, and she wrote a big article, and it started causing a lot of ripples around the country. And parent activists took it up. I blogged about it. Diane Ravitch blogged about it too. And very quickly, it became such a controversial issue, and parents were so outraged that over the last few months, 8 out of the 9 states that were originally planning to share data with In Bloom have pulled out. In April, Louisiana pulled out. In May, Georgia pulled out. Later that month, Reuters confirmed that Delaware, Georgia, and Kentucky had no plans to share data with In Bloom, even though they had been listed on the website as In Bloom partners. In August, the only pilot district in North Carolina pulled out. In November, an entirely anti-In Bloom slate was elected in Jefferson County, Colorado, which was the only district that was participating. Even before they took office, the next school board meeting, they unanimously voted to ditch In Bloom, and the superintendent resigned. And still that did not satisfy parent activists in Colorado. They went to their state superintendent and they said, we want you to sever all ties with In Bloom so that no district can sign up even if they want to. And 1 week later he did that. And then a couple weeks ago, I was in Chicago doing a forum and a presentation to editorial boards, and within a few hours of my landing in Chicago, Illinois decided the issue was too hot, and they were withdrawing. They were going to make it purely voluntary on the part of districts, even districts with Race to the Top funds. And within a few hours, Chicago pulled out of the program. I've never had so much impact in my life in such a short period of time. And I can tell you, here in New York, where it all started, where we've had the most organized resistance on the part of parents, school board members, district superintendents, legislators from both parties, local elected officials, our state is absolutely the worst state in the country when it comes to student privacy. We have made no headway with the state education department, and it's very frustrating to me, and I'm sure frustrating to you as well. So what information is being shared? It took us a long time to figure this out, and the state kept on saying, oh, we're going to give it to you soon, we're going to give it to you soon, we're going to give it to you soon. Finally, they gave it to us, and then they changed it again. But now we know, because their data dictionary is finally online, it's going to include student names, addresses, emails, phone numbers, test scores, grades, racial and economic status, not just whether you're on free lunch, but whether you receive any form of public assistance, your child's disability diagnosis, your child's 504, which in case you don't know can be a variety of health conditions ranging from allergies to epilepsy, and attendance and disciplinary data, including suspension records. Now, even in those districts, for example, in Jefferson County, they said they would not share any disciplinary or health data because it was too sensitive with Witten and Bloom. And in Illinois, they also said they would not share any health data within Bloom. So not only are we the worst state in the country in terms of still participating in this project, but we're the only ones that have said that health data and disciplinary data is going to be shared. Beyond that, the state is encouraging districts to share even more data within Bloom. And I've asked Ken Wagner, is there any limitation on the type or the amount of data that you believe districts can share within Bloom? And they said absolutely not. Whatever they like, they should be able to share it within Bloom, no matter how sensitive. You know, your child's counseling records. I mean, it just goes way beyond anything imaginable. Now, obviously, if this information leaks out or is misused, it could harm your child's prospects for life. Now, what is in Bloom's goal? It's kind of hard for them to ever explain it, and it's hard for me to explain it, but people always ask me, so I might as well tell you. In Bloom claims that this project will lead to greater efficiency, data analysis, and integration, and create a vibrant market in personalized learning tools by allowing vendors to data mine the information. So essentially what they mean by that is that instead of your teachers or administrators having to log into lots of different programs, they can log into one program with a data dashboard, and that data dashboard will be interoperable with all these nifty learning tools that they will be able to press on a button and assign to your child. So if they see your child is struggling in math and the child is ELL and perhaps has disciplinary problems, there will magically be a software program that's designed just for that child, and that will be allowed to change over time depending on how that child does on that software program. Ken Wagner has been quoted saying that the service providers' tools and standards will converge in a magic mix that hasn't come together before. A magic mix, can you imagine? Now, in New York City, we're very used to these kinds of promises because a number of years ago, we had a project that cost $80 million. In Bloom is, by the way, costing at least $100 million. ERIS was our data dashboard, going to cost $80 million in city funds. It was promised to revolutionize education, and there have been many studies and audits which show that it's a complete bust and it's almost never used. And when I crashed that learning camp that was run by the Gates Foundation, I explained this to the woman who was running it, who was running the In Bloom project for the Gates Foundation, and I said, you know, we've heard it all before, we don't believe it. And I explained to her about ERIS, and she nodded her head sadly, and then I later found out that she used to work for DOE, and she ran the ERIS project for DOE. Here's something we got from the In Bloom videos. They have these promotional videos that are supposed to be so appealing to parents, and they're very shocking and appalling to most parents. This is one of the things where they show what the collection of the data and the data dashboards will do is enumerate all your child's positive and qualifications and characteristics, and somehow allow teachers to sort them and keep a daily tab on their personal qualities and their various characteristics. And if your child is starting to act up or missing class or whatever, there are these warning flags that are supposed to go up. And these are all in the data dashboards that already the school districts have been asked to sign up for. Now, what about security? As you probably know, data clouds are not very secure. They get hacked into all the time. And in a recent survey of IT professionals, 86% said they do not trust data clouds for their more sensitive data. Now, InBloom's security policy, and you can see this on the InBloom website if you go there, says they cannot guarantee the security of the information stored or that the information will not be intercepted when it is being transmitted. Basically, they come out and say right off the top that they will not be responsible because they know there's no way to protect that data. In April, the personal information of 50 million customers of Living Social was disclosed when an Amazon.com cloud was hacked into, and this data is also being stored on an Amazon.com cloud. And all this, again, is being done without parental notification or consent. Now, what about privacy? You will see that the New York State Education Department repeatedly says this is compliant with FERPA, which is the federal law that regulates privacy. Unfortunately, most people think that that means it's really protected, but the federal law has been rewritten by the U.S. Department of Education. The law has not been changed, but the regulations have been rewritten twice in recent years to encourage this sort of data sharing without parental consent. And there was a lawsuit against the federal government for rewriting the law in such a way that was recently thrown out of court, not on substantive grounds, but because they said the law firm had a lack of standing. And if the very same data was in your child's health care files, your medical files, which often it is because it's disability related or 504 conditions, it would be absolutely illegal to share it with third parties without parental consent, and the person doing that could go to jail. But if the exact same information is in your child's educational records, it supposedly is not against the law to share that without consent. And the same with, there's been very strict rules about child's online usage by the FTC, that if your child goes on an online website, whatever data that they share through that online website, if it's a game or whatever, that cannot be shared without parental consent and cannot be used commercially without parental consent. So I also, and many others, have real problems with the whole concept of data dashboards, especially as they're going to be designed by these companies in SED, which will collect 12 years worth of your child's data going back to the day that they enroll in school. And so that means that every single disciplinary incident, every single struggle that your child has had will be instantly available at the touch of a fingerprint to anyone at the school level, including your child's teacher. Now, why is that inadvisable? There's a tremendous amount of data out there, studies that show that teachers tend to build negative preconceptions of your child in advance if they know a lot of problematic information about them, especially before they've ever met. And that can actually determine the teacher's attitude to your child and become a self-fulfilling prophecy, either in a positive or a negative way. There's a fascinating study that was done by University of California researchers where they gave IQ tests to a class, and then they randomly chose, out of the people who'd taken that IQ test, randomly a bunch of students, and told their teacher that these kids had been predicted through that test to make a big jump in IQ that year. And again, it was randomly selected. There was no basis, in fact, on this. And the kids who actually made the big jump in IQ that year were the ones that had been randomly chosen, and their teachers had been told that because their teachers gave them more input, more feedback, more attention. And so we really are very worried that kids will get negatively stereotyped and profiled based upon things that happened way back in their past. And as a parent, I was always very glad to know that my son had a new teacher every year and a new chance to make a new impression, and wouldn't be held back by sometimes trivial and sometimes not so trivial things that had happened in their past. So what about the costs? This is another thing the state doesn't like to talk about and tries to sort of bury under the rug. But the truth is that starting 1 year from now, InBloom is going to start charging. They originally said $2 to $5 per student. At the last testimony of the state, they said $3 to $5 per student when asked. But InBloom said the prices will probably go down as more states join in. And guess what? At this point, more states doesn't look like they're joining in. In fact, more states are pulling out. So that price is likely to go up. And one of the data specialists said, it doesn't make any sense. We're going to be spending money to buy back the data for our students that we gave InBloom for free. This doesn't count the charges of the data dashboard vendors that are also going to start charging in probably a year. The state says they're going to cover some of those charges, perhaps. No, the state says they're going to charge, maybe cover the in-bloom charges for a while they still get Race to the Top money, but they expect that money is going to run out. But they're not going to start covering the data dashboard charges, which will start charging in a year. And then nothing compares to the potential costs if this data breaches in terms of legal liability, which could open up the state to multi-$100-million class action suits. And also, InBloom says it's not selling the data, but exploring charging vendors for access to the data. This is just a sample of the kinds of things we found on the InBloom website, the kinds of data that they're collecting. You can see a lot of very personal stuff in there, including foster care, economic disadvantage, developmental delayed learning styles, program participations, 504 disabilities. 75% of school board members in a recent survey say they think they're opposed to this project. 78% say that they think parents should be able to opt out. 50 assembly members, I just got the letter today, have signed a letter to the commissioner expressing their concern. Senator Flanagan has called for a one-year moratorium on sharing data. At least 40 superintendents are giving back their Race to the Top funds, but still their data is going to be shared anyway. This is about the bills that were passed last year by the Assembly to allow opt-out and consent. Both of them have been resubmitted in the Senate. And Senator Flanagan has his own bill that now he's introduced, but it would not allow for parental consent or opt-out. This is the relationship between InBloom and the Common Core. Because this meeting was about the Common Core, I thought I'd bring that up. InBloom sold itself as helping with achieve the Common Core. Obviously, if you have uniform tests and test score data across the country, it becomes much easier and much more useful to aggregate multi-state databases. The federal government has put a lot of money to given states to create longitudinal cradle to the grave data systems where they will state agencies will share it among state agencies. And this is something that you can find that the federal government claims not to be interested in collecting personal student data. The agreement of the two testing consortia, one called PARC, one called Smarter Balance, that are doing the Common Core tests, and New York is supposed to has joined into PARC, though we're not sure when that's going to start. It clearly says in their agreement with the federal government that the grantee, meaning PARC, must provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level to the U.S. Department of Education. So that looks to me like at some level the federal government does or did want to collect all this data itself. So this is just the, Common Core, watch out, Uncle Sam wants your data, and then happy holidays. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. Does Santa work for InBloom? Thank you very much.
Laney, thank you.
Can I ask you a
Thank
couple
you, Lane.
questions? Can I ask you a couple questions? Sure. All right. My understanding is if you use 8 points of data, that's all you need to identify a child. And I further understand that what New York is looking to collect is over 400 points of data. Is that true?
That's true. It's more than 400. The state says it's less, but it's actually more, because every single course they take is a separate point, and they only count it once.
Okay. And, well, most of that's unnecessary for actually tracking a child, his educational experience.
The superintendents and principals I've talked to say they don't want any part of this. They don't think any of it's necessary. Even the ones that have their own data dashboards, they don't think that this is necessary.
All right. Can you tell me who the parent company is for InBloom?
The parent company, it's actually a separate corporation now.
But is it affiliate of Gates Foundation?
No, it was founded with $100 million of the Gates Foundation. It is a separate nonprofit corporation with a separate board. Most of the board members either work for the Gates Foundation or who are grantees of the Gates Foundation.
Okay. And we already went through, it's $5, $10 per student that would be paid to this foundation.
$3 to $5 to InBloom Inc., which is a nonprofit corporation. At first, it could go up.
All right. And now InBloom, now this non-for-profit corporation, I've heard that we have fellows that are actually working for the state ed department?
Absolutely. So the Regents Fellows are funded in part by the Gates Foundation, and the Regent Fellow, that one of them is in charge of the In Bloom project, and his name is Amrit Singh. And we found his name on emails to the Louisiana State Superintendent, luring him into In Bloom while he was working at the Regents.
Okay, but right now we have some of these Regents Fellows that are being paid in the State Department of Education,
Right.
and we have other regions that are actually serving in a capacity for the Education Committee for the Assembly. Is that true? Do you know?
There are Regent Fellows working under John King, is that what you're saying?
John King, but they're also embedded in the
State Education.
State Education Committee for the Assembly. Do you know anything about that?
They're working for the State Education Committee?
What, no.
I didn't know that.
We have...
The Assembly
The
Committee?
Assembly Committee.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
I have no
I'm just
personal
wondering, because
knowledge.
I had a debate over that at the end of session, and one of the questions I asked was whether or not anyone working as our staff in the Education Committee actually had experience in a classroom. And the term fellows came out, so I was just wondering if you looked at that, if you knew that we had any fellows working in the Education Committee that we should be looking at.
Not that I know.
All right. Now, did you say Flanagan's bill would not have the option to opt out for parents?
That's right. What he says is he's going to, needs to be a privacy officer that will develop a parental bill of rights, but he will be appointed by the commissioner and work under the commissioner. And right now, we have no confidence that this commissioner would ever allow a parental opt-out or consent. And in fact, the spokesperson for the State Education Department has said that when you enroll your child in a public school, a parent loses all rights to control that child's data.
Okay. And lastly, I know that my school district, which is Sachem, their stuff was put out, students' information was put out on the internet. And matter of fact, I got 3 letters from my children, and my son's 29, and his data went out there. And I understand there's one individual I know that has an IEP, and his IEP was put out on the website. It was taken down, but, and now you said this was a wireless service? Is that
So
what
there's a company called Wireless Generation, and it had several big contracts with the Department of Education in New York City, but also around the country. When Joel Klein resigned as chancellor in New York City, Rupert Murdoch bought up Wireless Generation and made Joel Klein the head of it's called now Amplify, which is the educational products division of News Corporation, which is owned and run by Rupert Murdoch. So the operating system of In Bloom is run by a subsidiary of the News Corporation. And in fact, if you go to the contract between the state and In Bloom, which was then called the Shared Learning Collaborative, the privacy and security policy is controlled by Wireless Generation, which is rather strange. So we have a lot of questions about that as well.
All right, my last question. The fellows that I understand that are working for the State Education Department, and they're helping to write policy for the state ed, they are not paid by the state, correct? They're
Correct,
paid,
private funds.
and they're being paid by this foundation, correct?
There are several different foundations that have given money, and the Gates Foundation is one of the largest.
Okay, but they're working inside the building for the New York State Department of Education.
Yes,
But then none of them are on the payroll for New York State.
that's true.
Thank you.
Laney, thank you. Thanks for joining us and learning as we go along here. Thank you so much. In terms of the data transmission, and I've heard some families and parents talk about it, what's the status of the transmission of data?
So this is a story that's very disturbing, and it's only coming out in drips and drabs, but as far as we know now, there was a lot of data that was uploaded last December to allow and help In Bloom for its infrastructure development. In other words, for it to build its product, they uploaded real data. We don't know exactly what. And then they uploaded a lot of data, including personally identifiable data, including the state unique student ID number in July to help with the data portal roadshows. So these companies that are selling their data dashboards, one of them is Pearson, one of them is EduScholar, and one of them is another company, I forget, went around the state to sell their products to district officials. And instead of using dummy data, which would have been very, very easy for them to do, they actually uploaded real live student data and allowed people to see that. Just people, I guess, walking through the data roadshows. But they haven't uploaded the names yet. I asked Ken Wagner if they uploaded addresses, phone numbers, the rest, and he said he didn't think so, though he's been asked this question a million times and he doesn't really answer any time. But, so we have a lawsuit that was filed in court a few weeks ago, and we had to delay it a little bit because our attorneys found more ways in which the state education department was breaking the law, and so now the hearing in court is January 3rd, and we wanted to delay it a little bit more because we have to respond to their papers, and it's going to be hard to get the response between Christmas and New Year's. But they said no more delays because we cannot put off uploading the names and everything else beyond January 15th. We won't delay any further beyond January 15th. We're asking for an immediate injunction. We have no idea whether we're going to get it or not, but we pray we will.
So in essence, so either court action or legislative action, adopting and passing legislation before January 15th.
Absolutely. I would love it if legislation was passed that, was good legislation before then. I don't know what the chances are, really. I mean, I think I would love every legislator to get in touch with the regions in particular and John King and tell them to put a moratorium on it at least so that there can be discussions and something can be worked out. And that's one of the things that Senator Flanagan has done. I think, even a 6-month moratorium would be advisable. But at this point, I don't know that they listen to anybody. I mean, you would think they would, but I haven't seen any sign of it. And so they've gone around the state. I'm sure you've seen the videos. Parents bring this up all the time. They boo and they hiss, and the same answers come back every time that, we're protecting your data, we care about your privacy, but, we need to do this. We need to do this.
Thank you, lady.
Can I just ask? I guess two quick questions. You mentioned in your slides the 2 bills that the Assembly passed last year that are awaiting action in the Senate, and I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more, just your feelings on how far those would go towards addressing some of these issues, as opposed to basically passing a bill or, state ed just pulling out of this completely.
Well, I think both bills that were passed in the Assembly, and they were also submitted in the Senate and got good bipartisan support in the Senate as well, would stop In Bloom one way or the other. The first bill blocks redisclosures without parental consent, which is what In Bloom was designed to do. It would allow the continuation of certain of the vendors that school districts say that they do already. I'm not sure that they really need to do all that stuff that they do without consent, but they say that they do. So this bill was very carefully designed to stop redisclosures without parental consent, and also to require full liability on the part of any company that allows for breaches, so that In Bloom would be responsible if anything happened. And the second bill would allow parental opt-out of any third-party vendor sharing. And I think that we could really make sure that enough parents opted out of the In Bloom scheme to make the whole process probably so unattractive to In Bloom that they wouldn't even want to go through with it, because so many people would be opting out. And they really want a full data set. So I think both bills are good bills, and I would encourage, them them to be resubmitted and passed.
Yeah, and I believe they both passed unanimously, so I'm sure they will have no trouble passing unanimously again next year, especially given the renewed and continued public attention on this. But I just wanted to ask you that question, just, whether those bills might be sufficient to do what we needed to do, or whether more was needed if we could, get those enacted into law. But I think it does sound like they would go far enough in really frustrating the purpose of things that it would kind of almost force in Bloom to take a step back, because it wouldn't be worth their while. They wouldn't be getting the data that they need to do what they're looking to do with it.
Right. Our lawsuit, it turns out there's a very good state law already on the books that's never been complied with by the state education department, and most people didn't even know it existed, called the Personal Privacy Protection Law, that was passed in 1984, and it has very strong protections on all kinds of data that collected by the state. Any state agency has to require consent unless the sharing of this data is necessary or specifically authorized by law. And in this case, we don't think it's either necessary or authorized by law. So, there's all sorts of other stuff in the law about that the state has to have a chief privacy officer. Every agency has to appoint one, and has to put out a privacy impact study every year. If there's any change in how they're sharing data, the state education department has never complied with this since the law was passed in 1984.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this. This is extremely helpful, and it's so great to match a name with a face. So
Yes, thank
really
you.
appreciated this, and thanks again to my colleagues for holding this. I have found this extremely helpful, and I do regret that I have a concert for my son that I have to leave for. Just a couple of just clarifying questions, because I was at the hearing held last month on this in the Assembly. And at that time, I thought there were still a couple of states left, but you mentioned all the states that have pulled out. At this point, is New York State the only state working within Bloom, or is there still another or two that are still working with
So
them?
Massachusetts was going to share data for one district, Everett, Mass. And there was a lot of furor and protest and organized resistance. And they have not formally pulled out, but they say they have no plans to share data anytime soon. So what we hear from the state advocates and the state board is that it's not going ahead. They're not going to necessarily embarrass in Bloom by announcing it, but they have no plans to go ahead with it. In Illinois, it's a little bit similar, in which there are 35 districts that they're allowing to share data with in Bloom, if they so choose. But they're not going to make them return race to the top funds if they don't, and we don't really know whether any of them will go ahead and do it. We don't think it's likely that they'll do it at this point. Every other state that I know of has completely pulled out.
Okay, and you do think the couple of bills that have passed would go far enough in helping to derail as much of this as possible?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. The research fellows you mentioned, I share some of the concerns about where that is going. I wasn't aware that there might be one already in the Assembly working there. But can you just comment in general on the research fellows, and if that's part of the problem here? Many of us at the table have raised concerns about the implementation of the Common Core overall, along with the testing. Is that part of the issue here, that this has been driven by the research fellows and kind of?
Well, you can't listen to John King very long without realizing that he is a true believer. I have no doubt that he believes in what he's doing is right, but I do believe at the same time that a lot of this is being driven by the Gates Foundation, which has put hundreds of millions of dollars into the Common Core and is giving the state education department millions of dollars, not just for the Regents Fellows, but I think has given them over $15 million in the last few years for a number of programs and projects. So they are very much ideologically aligned. I do not believe that the money is completely irrelevant to the fact that they I can only suspect that part of their resistance to pulling out may be because of all the money that they've gotten from the Gates Foundation, and who knows how much money they are being promised at this point, but if they don't pull out, because right now, if New York State pulled out, this $100 million project by the Gates Foundation would go completely bust. So I think there's tremendous pressure on them probably not to pull out. I find the whole mixing of private money very disturbing. This is happening in New York State, it's happening around the country, and it's ways that private billionaires get to have their education agendas implemented with very little public knowledge and support. And it's a way of really getting around our democratic system.
Thank you, and again, Just one quick question. I don't want to, just a quick question. Your PowerPoint, I found it very helpful. Is that available online, or is that accessible?
Sure. Well, I just finished it today on the train, but I can easily send it to you. So.
Okay. If we could, that'd be really helpful.
I have-
Thank you so much,
yeah,
and thank
sure.
you again, Steve and others,
Thank you
for
so
holding
much
this.
for having me. I really
appreciated.
appreciate it.
Laney,
Yep.
hold on.
Lane,
Oh, okay, great.
just a couple questions. The Department of Education, they're collating all this information from the school district, go to them for collation before it goes to In Bloom?
That's my understanding. It gets sent to the RISCs, what are they called? The Regional Information Center, the RICs and the BOCES. The RICs and the BOCES, and then the RICs and the BOCES upload it to the In Bloom cloud.
Okay. Do they share that with any intrastate interest, like the regions or the committees on education for the Senate, the Assembly, or just they send it out? They just goes to In Bloom?
As far as I know, it's going to In Bloom, and In Bloom is sending it to the data dashboard companies. So it's traveling many, many miles through the internet. So the data dashboards are supposed to collect the data through the internet from the In Bloom cloud. Now, school districts who already have some of these data dashboards say, we just input the data ourselves into the data dashboards. The companies don't even get access to it, but even if they did, it would be only temporarily if there was a virus or something. But even so, the transmission would just be from the district to the data dashboard companies. Now it's going from the district to the RICs, to the In Bloom cloud, from the In Bloom cloud back to the data dashboard companies, and then to the districts. And every time you transmit that data through the internet, there are more and more chances of breaches. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Well, when there's a collection of data, there's usually a reason for that data to achieve a goal, an understanding of an outcome or a direction. Is there a goal at the end of this, or did they give it to a certain group to give recommendations or evaluate what this means in terms of better educational outputs and?
Well, right now, they say that the data dashboards are the main focus, which is, these things that teachers can look at in the classroom or principals can look at. But the ultimate goal of In Bloom, as I said, was to create a market and personalized learning tools, which means that they wanted to give this data to as many vendors as possible in an easily digestible form to help them create their commercial products that would then be sold back to schools.
Okay.
And all this personal data would somehow help these companies build their products better.
But it doesn't preclude others from getting it, for using it for any other reason, other than educational purposes, really.
Well, my view is that these companies are in there to make money, and they're not in there for purely educational purposes. But you see, it's illegal to share this information for commercial purposes without parental consent, but the state education department says it's not commercial, it's educational.
Laney, just real quick, I have one question for you, but then I want to just ask anybody in the audience, if you have a question for Laney, maybe just sort of kind of stand up, raise your hand, kind of speak loudly enough for everyone to hear you. I don't know if anybody has questions specifically for Laney, but first I want to thank you very much, Laney. That was fantastic information. My question for you is, you had asked a very specific question of the Deputy Commissioner of Education, right, Ken Wagner? You asked him about what data had been uploaded, and he had no answer for you, or he could not tell you what had been uploaded. Is that correct?
All he would say is that no names had yet been uploaded, as far as he knew. And then I said, what about addresses? And he said, I don't think so. And then I said, what about disabilities? And he said, I don't know.
Okay. Does it seem plausible to you at all that the Deputy Commissioner of Education of the state of New York would not know what is being uploaded?
I don't know, but he's been asked this question so many times that he should have found out the answer.
Well, the reason I ask that is that many of us were at that education forum in Albany a few weeks ago, and many in the audience were at that education forum, and I specifically asked them about a data breach, and we talked about Sachem. I said, what happens, what's the ramifications of this if the data is breached? And I got the same answer. So I just want that on record that we have a deputy commissioner, and I know they're watching, so I just want to speak directly to the camera. We have a deputy commissioner that has no idea what's going on with our student data in the state of New York. Or that's what he's telling us, that he has no idea. I think the likelihood is that he knows exactly what's being uploaded and is just not sharing that information with the people of New York. But Laney, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. Laney wrote up here from New York City. We're very glad we didn't hold this forum yesterday. But Laney, thank you so much. Does anybody have a question for Laney?
Yeah, one.
Okay.
The money for the storage, the data storage? The $3 to $5, that is being paid by the school districts, correct?
I
Or is
think
it
the
the
state is going to cover the charges for In Bloom. At least they hope to cover it until sometime in 2015, and then the money's going to run out. They say they hope to get enough Race to the Top funds renewed so that somewhere in the middle of 2015 that money's going to run out. But they weren't sure, and that's another thing which they've been very ambiguous on. They said pretty clearly the districts are going to have to start paying for the data dashboards in a year. And if they don't want to pay for the data dashboards in a year, they can pull out of the data dashboards, but they can't ever pull their data out of In Bloom. The only one who can ever pull the data out of In Bloom for the entire state is John King.
Okay, well, here's the problem with that. We were also told that the amount of money paid for the evaluations that the governor wanted the schools to pay for, that the state would pay for that. However, it was never put in the budget. So it actually, the schools never got reimbursed for that payment. So, you know, I have a real problem when I'm being told that the school districts aren't going to be able or be made to eat this fee.
All right, the Common Core is a huge unfunded mandate that is being put on districts.
Okay, thank you.
Laney, thank you. I think we have a question for you. Yep.
No.
Short and sweet. Yes.
I was wondering, I signed up on your sheet to get emails. Can you email us your outline here?
Sure. Yeah, I'll put it up on them and on my website too, if you're interested.
Yes, sir.
I'm familiar with FERPA being rewritten. I'm not familiar with HIPAA. It's called, in FERPA, it's called authorized agents. Yeah, so contractors or authorized agents are allowed to get the data without parental consent. There's no limitation that I know of. As long as the state or the district agrees and it's for a specific educational purpose that can be called educational. Yeah, there's no limitation. It's you know, when FERPA was passed by the federal government, it was a very strong privacy law. It was one of the strongest privacy laws that we have. And then it was completely rewritten twice, under George Bush and then again under Obama, and now it's almost meaningless. I agree. It's unbelievable.
Thank Jim for being here this evening. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks, everybody.
Any other questions for Laney? No? Yes.
So what we were told was race to the top one. The state was mandated, somewhere within that edict of getting that money, that they have to come up with this data mining.
So that, again, is a misinformation put out by the State Education Department. What was required is a state longitudinal data system, which in every other state is internally run by the state. And there was no mention of giving any data to third parties or in Bloom in either the Race to the Top provisions or in the state's application and grant award from the federal government. There's no necessity for this.
So how, I mean, I'm not sure how it goes as far as whether it's in Bloom or whatever, Mo is gonna win, but basically, we're sort of being told by, our district that as part of our race to the top money, we need to now start putting stuff into the database. The problem is you're told this late, and that money's been earmarked for other things that we're told to use it for. If we give it back, if we could not do it, we don't have that money left. And the way that we were also told was, and I hope I get this right, is that, we can spend the money to put the data in, and then after we put the data in, there's no more money left to raise the top, we don't have to use it. So basically, we have to put our money forth to put this in, and then once that data's in there, you just set it, it's gonna stay in there forever, that we then don't have to use that portal anymore.
The whole thing is insane because we don't even know if the data portals are going to work. Because this is the first try of InBloom. We're the only state doing this. It's never been tried before. It could be months before the data portals even work, and then the money runs out next December. But InBloom gets to keep the data. I mean,
Left because we were earmarked the money to use some other things with. So in our district, it was like $250,000 3 years ago. We were told how to use it. We used it. Now we have to come up with the money that someone input the stuff in. And then we're also told after that's done, after you put it in, you got any money left, you don't have to use it.
yeah, and for districts who gave their money back who aren't going to use it. They're giving their money back, but their data is still going up into InBloom anyway, and what's the purpose of that?
Yep.
They can't explain, except that, InBloom and the Gates Foundation want the data. And it's very powerful. Data is very powerful. It's worth huge amount of money to companies and to the Gates Foundation because they can do all sorts of research. I think their original goal was going to have a multi-state, really a national database. They were going to be able to do all sorts of fantastic things, including do, national evaluations of teachers as they moved across state lines to make it difficult for them to get jobs elsewhere if they lost their job in one state. But, as now we're the only state left in there, it's becoming less and less plausible to even imagine what the possible goal of the Gates Foundation could be. But they are insisting.
Laney, thank you. Appreciate it very much. I know that went a little long, but totally worth it, right? Excellent. Thank you, Laney. I think at this point let's open it up to the floor, and whoever wants to come up. We have a mic. Oh, good. We have a mic here in the audience, so that's good. So if you want to come up, we have a list of speakers. Terrific. Great. All right. So first is Angela Bergen here. Where's Angela? No? Yell out if I call you. How about Deidre? Is Deidre here? Deidre Entrup? Deidre Entrup. All right. Lee is here. I know Lee Bordick's here. Lee, you're up. Lee Bordick. I think. Is this my list of speakers? Lee, did you plan on speaking?
It's the ones that are dashed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lee, I just put you on the spot. I'm sorry, it's the ones that are dashed. I apologize that for Lee. But Lee is here. Lee is like a legend in the superintendent world throughout New York State. Is Monica here? Monica Counter. All right, Monica's up. Hey, thanks, Pat. Monica, just hang on one sec. Pat has to leave us. Thank you, Pat. We appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good to see you. See you soon,
Thank you
too.
for doing
Take care.
this.
Did you want to come and sit up there, relax?
Yeah, great.
My name is Monica Counter, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here wearing 3 hats, essentially. I'm a parent of a child with a disability. My son is 7 years old. He has high-functioning autism, ADHD, apraxia, auditory processing disorder, sensory integration disorder, and developmental coordination disorder. Secondly, I'm an educator. I have a master's degree in education, and I've studied early childhood development at length. Third, I'm an advocate. I have received extensive training from Parent to Parent of New York State in lay advocacy. I have been trained to help other parents of children with disabilities fight for their children's rights with regard to their education. I struggled with what to say here tonight. I should speak as a parent, as an educator, or an advocate, so I'm going to speak as all 3. Asking students, young students with disabilities, to try to learn a curriculum that is one size fits all is the antithesis of how they learn. A special education expert in autism once told me, if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. In other words, no 2 children, even on the same spectrum, are alike. How can you possibly expect all children with disabilities to learn the same way? Because of this difference, every student has an IEP, an individual education plan created by the district, hopefully with input and agreement from parents. An IEP is created to meet the specific needs of each child. Many schools have tried to basically do the absolute minimum that they're required in terms of programming, supports, and services even before Common Core. Now, because of Common Core and its implementation, districts feel they have the permission to basically say, Common Core trumps IEPs, and more than one district has been, students in districts have been told that. And I have checked with state ed, and that is not true. But that is somewhere along the line, that is what the districts have been told. I don't know where it's coming from. The decision by NYSED to roll out a curriculum and assessment plan with no thought of how it would impact a student with disabilities is negligent, abusive, and unconscionable. To continue full steam ahead once it's brought to their attention by hundreds of parents, teachers, principals, district superintendents, school psychologists, and social workers is criminal. Parents of students with disabilities are asking how this could be happening when there is a federal law in place which was enacted in 1975 to protect students with disabilities, the IDEA. All students under this law are entitled to a free and appropriate education, stating that all students must be college and career ready. Using a one-size-fits-all curriculum and assessments will do the opposite for students with disabilities. Curriculum based on chronological age and then going 2 grades above it for students with disabilities, rather than curriculum based on their instructional level, is doomed to create a generation of adults without high school diplomas. These students are looking to the adults around them for help. They don't understand why all of a sudden school is so much harder for them, and it was hard enough before Common Core. Now it's virtually impossible. My son has always loved school. He's very smart. However, he cannot learn the way his typical peers do. He also can't learn in a mainstream classroom. We've tried it three times actually, and each time it's failed. For the last 2 years, he's been in a self-contained program. Last year, he thrived. The program was wonderful. He ended the year academically on par with typical grade level peers. This year has been a disaster. The program he's in now is a continuation of the same program he was in last year. So what's the difference? Common Core. His teachers told me last year that they were certain that with the right supports, programming, and services, my son would be able to attend college if he chose to. I'm not hearing that this year. My son has daily meltdowns. He calls himself bad, and he can't do anything. He thinks he's stupid. Common Core took away his happiness and his confidence. If something isn't done soon to get rid of Common Core, it will destroy his love of learning and natural curiosity as well. His class has become a place where the teacher is putting out fires all day. Students are now having aggressive, sometimes violent outbursts because of the stress. Again, this didn't happen last year. My son, who is well behaved in school, is not having his needs met because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and he doesn't squeak. He shuts down. He spends most of his time with his hands over his ears. He can't handle the noise and the commotion in the classroom. Common Core has broken my son's spirit and damaged his very soul, and he's not alone in his pain and frustration with school. My son knows that I have been fighting against Common Core and why. I consider this a valuable lesson in civics. He sees me working hard within the law to effect change, to right a grievous wrong. Every single day, he asks me when Common Core will go away. And every day I tell him I don't know, but I won't give up until it's gone. My last statement is part of an email that I sent to Governor Cuomo. Please do not continue to be silent regarding this abomination that is Common Core. We, the parents, will not go away. Parents of children with disabilities are warriors. We have had to fight for everything for our children since the day of their diagnosis, and for some, since they were born. We fight for doctors, therapies, school programs, and services. We will never accept the violation of our children's rights. They are protected under the IDEA, a federal law. We are listening and we are waiting. We have really good memories. After all, we need to keep track of doctor's appointments, therapy schedules, team meetings, medicines, and more. And that is on top of everything that we have to juggle in our lives to support our children. We will remember your stance on Common Core when the next election rolls around. I can promise you that. Thank you.
Okay. Can you tell me how many hours of homework does your son do a night right now?
He gets a homework packet for the week. My son has fine motor issues. He can barely write his name. And it's between 7 and 11 pages of written homework. It is in his IEP that it is supposed to be modified to reduce the motor component. When I brought this up, the teacher told me I could modify it for him.
Okay, and while you're looking through some of the packages, one of the things that we've heard quite a bit with the modulars
Yes.
is that, number one, they're not complete. Number two, it seems like nobody's edited them.
That is correct, yeah.
Number three, they would say circle the numbers, and there are no numbers.
Yeah.
How did he do with math last year?
He was on grade level with math, but what's really hard for him is this year it's all basically word problems. And my son is a visual learner, so asking him to take an abstract sentence and turn it into a number sentence is very difficult for him. So what I've had to do is I've had to actually use pennies, manipulatives, to give him a visual in terms of, okay, this is what they're trying to do, and I try to help him figure it out. I mean, for him, even figuring out whether it's addition or subtraction is hard. And as far as the spelling homework is concerned, it's redundant. And for someone who has writing issues, write each word 3 times. Second page, put each word in alphabetical order. Third page, write a sentence for each word. Fourth page, okay, does it end in A-N-K or I-N-K? Put them in the columns. I mean, he knows how to spell those words. He doesn't need to write them over and over again, which is a complete source of frustration to him.
Okay. Now, he sat down for they had 3 days of testing.
Well, he actually is in 2nd grade, so he hasn't done the testing yet. But I did approach my district and let them know that I was going to send them an opt-out letter. And my assistant superintendent informed me that my 7-year-old has to refuse the test when it's handed to him by his teacher. They will not accept an opt-out letter.
Well, I'd suggest you send it anyway.
Oh, I plan to.
Now, I mean, last year he was doing well in school, and this
Yes.
year he's just
Yes,
shut down.
yes. I took him to a child psychologist today for the first time.
All right. Has, what I'm hearing is a lot of kids, what's happening is for them to actually be able to deal with the added frustration and
Yes.
that they're winding up with medication or more medication.
It was suggested to me today by his pediatrician, and I'm going to try to hold off on that because I have made the decision that he's not going back to school in January. I will be homeschooling him.
Okay. And now, you've got a degree in elementary education.
Yes.
And have you had an opportunity to take a look at some of the curriculum?
Yes, I worked last year as a sub and early this year as a sub, and I actually worked as a teaching assistant sub while I was waiting for my certification to come through because I was certified in Massachusetts. It just came through. I had an appointment for an interview with BOCES. I canceled it because I told them I cannot in good conscience go in and teach Common Core.
Right. Now, have you found the curriculum to be developmentally appropriate?
Totally.
Or age appropriate?
Totally inappropriate.
Okay. Well, I have a degree in elementary education too, and I'm looking at it, and I have no idea who wrote this nonsense.
Nobody who's an educator.
And lastly, trying to think of, okay, can you explain to me, maybe you can explain since you're an educator also. I've asked this question in every forum that I've gone to. I haven't gotten an answer yet. Could you explain to me why a first grader has to be able to point out to me where ancient Mesopotamia is on a map or a globe, and why ancient Mesopotamia, what contributions ancient Mesopotamia has made on modern-day civilization?
Not one reason that I
They're
can come up
6
with.
years
It would
old.
be more important, quite frankly, that he could point out New York State first.
Okay. Thank you.
Pete?
And Monica, thank you for joining us. I have two nephews with autism, and they'll be encountering the same thing as they move. Now, it's your son, correct?
Yes.
Now, is your son doing any mainstream classes as well, or is he?
It was tried on 3 separate occasions, but because of his sensory issues and auditory processing issues, he can't handle it. It's
Right.
just overstimulating to him.
So getting back to the distinction between last year and this year.
Yes.
So his course of instruction was more tactile, and he
It was more tactile, and the grouping was more homogeneous. I think the stress is bringing out behaviors that might have always been there for some kids, but were normally not expressed at school.
Yes, we're hearing routinely about children having their joy taken away, about issues of blaming themselves, am I dumb, mommy
Yes.
or daddy, is there something wrong with me? And I guess the premise is, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the support from the educational facility, you mentioned that you're getting mixed signals? Or
Yes,
people
I mean,
feel that-
I'm fully aware of the fact
Yeah.
that there are some people in my district, some teachers, who
Yeah.
are, they don't believe Common Core is appropriate, and yet I know that they can't express that, and when I started making noise, I was told through a third party that my son's teacher was not allowed to speak to me without an administrator present. And in fact, when I went to my parent-teacher conference, the principal was there, and she wasn't there for any of the other mothers, just me.
Just one last question. I've heard this from at least a couple sources now. What we see is a continued undermining of parental rights as well.
Absolutely.
And I don't see why, if you send a letter in,
Yeah.
and you request a certain course of action as a parent, why they deny that and then
They
say that
forced
you're...
my 7-year-old son to say no to a teacher when in his entire life he's been told he has to do what the teacher tells him to do.
I just find that unconscionable.
I do too.
So, yeah,
No,
all right. Well, it sounds like we have multiple aspects, there are many layers to this onion, it sounds like, but thank you for sharing your passion with us. Thank you.
Just something you mentioned very early in your testimony about basically the idea of Common Core trumping the IEP.
yes.
And I don't know whether you were talking about at the local level that being, I'm assuming they weren't saying that as a matter of policy, they were saying it as a matter of practicality.
They were saying like our hands are tied.
Yeah, because I think it's a bit of a disingenuous statement for state ed to tell you, no, that's not the case, when it's quite clear.
It's getting to them from
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah,
I don't know from
It's quite clear to
whom.
me that there has not been ample flexibility, or really any flexibility put into
Right.
this to allow for flexibility for special education
And I'm hearing it
students.
from multiple sources. I started a Facebook page, I co-founded a Facebook page called New York State Lawsuit for Children with Disabilities Against Common Core. We have 664 members. It was started a month ago. And have daily posts of parents who are frustrated beyond belief as to what this curriculum and these assessments are doing to their special needs child.
Yes. Yeah, we, I mean, the stories we've heard as we've gone around the state, we had one a few weeks ago at a forum me and Al were at, where we had a teacher, in tears telling us a story about a student that she just noticed had stopped working during one of the tests, and when she went over to the special needs student, he was stabbing himself with a pencil.
Yep.
I mean, just in a place where we're supposed to create the best possible environment, if this policy is driving, those type of situations to occur, it's really just wrong for us.
Well,
I thank you for speaking out on it.
I found an article way back from, I believe, 2011, where China sent their prominent educators to California because they recognized that after years of doing it the way they were doing it, which is basically what we're proposing, they created an entire generation of test takers. And they came here specifically because they recognized that the way we were doing it was better, and yet we're trying to do it now the way they're doing it. I don't understand. That makes no sense.
We actually had a woman speak at one of the forums we held on Long Island, who was educated as a child in Asia, and came over here and felt like she was labeled at a young age, and she was basically saying, I implore you not to let happen to our educational system in America what I grew up with.
Exactly.
And that's what I escaped, and that's why my parents left there, because they wanted something better for me.
And throughout history, immigrants have come to this country because they recognized that we have one of the best education in the world, and people had opportunities to pursue their interests, and that's not going to happen under Common Core because interests and passions are being ignored.
Monica, thank you. That was powerful. Thank you very much. So we are joined, I'm pleased to say, by not only a great friend, but a great congressman. Congressman Chris Gibson is with us. Thank you, Chris, for being here. Chris Chris is also a graduate of Ichabod Crane. He makes his home down in Kinderhook, and he has he got an education even though they canceled that school quite a bit. Well, I'm just kidding. I love Ichabod Crane. I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. I love the school district. But Chris has 3 kids in the public school system down there, so very focused on this issue, as we all are, and we really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, and Steve and Pete and Ed, thank you for your leadership pulling this together, and also deeply appreciate the testimony of our witnesses today. And I apologize for the delay. I'm coming from Fremont. That's a town in Sullivan County where I was with a World War II veteran and came through some weather on the way back here. But this is a very important gathering, and what I want to say right up front is to the parents, to the teachers, to the administrators who are very frustrated by the direction that we are moving right now, frustrated with Common Core, frustrated by the over-federalization of education policy. What I want you to know is, first and foremost, we hear you. And secondly, we're doing something about it. In the United States Congress, I'm working to roll back this over-federalizing in education. I'm proud to have had the endorsement and to have the endorsement of our teachers here in New York State, and I'm working with them. We have introduced legislation. We have worked amendments in the United States House of Representatives to address this situation. And I'm here today because while our assemblymen right here are working very hard at the state level, there are impacts that are coming from the federal government. And the origins of where we are today in the main come from 2001, from No Child Left Behind legislation. I've never questioned the intentions here. This was a bipartisan piece of legislation, and I think that the authors of it wanted to do well. But I want to make it clear, I think it was wrong-headed policy. And today, we're dealing with the impacts of that, and it's cascaded down. No Child Left Behind to Race to the Top with the attendant Common Core, and with an attempt to homogenize graduates. I think really failing to recognize that what may work in, say, Washington County may not work in the Bronx and vice versa. And we're dealing with unfunded mandates, which have been around for some time, but were certainly accelerated with No Child Left Behind and then Race to the Top and now in the Common Core. And over-testing, way over-testing, invasion of privacy with data mining, and this has to stop. And that's why I appreciate the leadership right here and pulling this together. And, what I would say is there have been other unintended consequences. And let me just say this, that even the origins of it, I think, were off the mark. We were worried about testing. And from a methodological standpoint, there were problems with the data that we're analyzing. We are trying to compete with nations who don't test their entire population. They'll test in certain ways for those inclined for certain career paths, whereas in America, we're testing for everyone. And then we're measuring apples to oranges. And what I would argue is we should be looking at Y variables, not X variables here, at least initially. And how can it be that a country such as ours that's still producing some of the most advanced goods and products in the world? You look at the fact that not far from here in Malta, we manufacture the most state-of-the-art semiconductor in the world, and we make common goods in an uncommon way. We clearly, as our last panelists had stated here, we're doing some things incredibly well. We recognize it's not perfect, and we want to do better. But homogenizing graduates is not the answer. And there is a difference between goals and standards. I've lived a life of accountability. I understand accountability. But the unintended consequences when you move from goals to standards is that the school districts that are endeavoring to do better, and you're going to base this on competition in terms of the resources they're going to get, they're not going to win those competitions. It's going to be the schools with the socioeconomic advantages. And then the schools that are trying to do better get penalized for that. So, what we need to do is roll back this, recognize that the differences between goals and standards, goals can be helpful because they inform. They can help us in terms of the skills, attributes, and experiences of successful graduates, and hearing from the captains of industry and the captains of academia and the captains of the military is informative to school boards, to administrators, to teachers as they approach curriculum and pedagogy. But moving it from goals to standards takes the power away from local schools. And what we should be doing is empowering local schools. And so we need to roll back this, and this is the aim of my legislative work here, and I want to complement the work that's being done at the state and try to ease up the unfunded mandates and ease up a lot of these specifications that have come down so that these gentlemen and gentleladies at the state level can then be sufficiently empowered to take this all the way in, listening to our local leaders so that we can have the kind of school system that we know we're going to need for the 21st century. So thank you for this opportunity to be with you, but most importantly, just know that we hear your voices and we're looking to make a difference on what it is you're communicating. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes?
Dr. Steve Gibson, it's my understanding that we wouldn't have Common Core and we wouldn't have Race to the Top without the Federal Department of Education. Are you willing to do anything to defund and eliminate the Department of Education?
I actually don't think that's the solution to the problem here. I think the problem is the specific legislation that's coming forward here, and it's Race to the Top, it's Common Core that's part of that, and it's No Child Left Behind. I do believe this, and I think that we share the sentiment that we're spending way too much money on bureaucracy, and I've learned this. I can tell you that I have studied this extensively in the 3.5+ years that I've been retired from the military. And we could use those resources that are in Washington, D.C., and we could get them down in here into school districts. So to the extent that we should be rolling back bureaucracy and empowering local school districts, we absolutely share that in mind. But I do think that there can be a role for the federal government in terms of a couple things. One is capturing lessons learned and sharing information to enhance situational awareness, and then also following through on the pledges. One of the pledges that the federal government made is that they were going to fund 40% of Title I. Never funded more than 17%. And what does that really translate to? That translates to an unfunded mandate down here at the local level. And let me say one other thing, that because of the unfunded mandates that have cascaded down, what's left, when our school board members actually sit down, the moment that they take their first meeting, 75% of their budget is already accounted for, and they have to find solutions, and the 25% is discretionary. And among those areas are our BOCES and Questar. And if we're going to be a nation that makes things with our hands, and we absolutely need to recover some of this, then we have to have these wonderful programs, and we got to stop squeezing them out because they need the resources necessary to thrive. So I would tell you that rolling back federal involvement includes gaining efficiencies from too much bureaucracy, but I do think that there is a role for the federal government.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to let everyone know what we're going to do here. We have a list of folks that want to speak, and everybody that wants to speak is definitely going to get heard. Laney gave a great presentation, and then there was quite a few questions there. So we're not behind schedule, but we are going to bring up now Sandra Stotsky, and I'll let Tim introduce her. Sandra's going to join us via Skype. She's going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes. I think you'll find it exceptionally informative, and then we'll open it back up for questions.
Again, I have to say, Assemblyman McLaughlin has done a tremendous job in assembling three of the best experts on these critical topics. The next guest via Skype is Dr. Sandra Stotsky, and she is Professor of Education Emeritus at the University of Arkansas, where she held the 21st Century Chair in Teacher Quality. She served as Senior Associate Commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from 1999 to 2003, where she was in charge of developing or revising all the state's K-12 standards, teacher licensure tests, and teacher and administrator licensure regulations. She served on the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education from 2006 to 2010. on the National Mathematics Advisory Panel from 2006 to 2008, and on the Common Core Validation Committee from 2009-2010. She was one of the 5 members of the Validation Committee who would not sign off on the standards as being validated. She was also editor of NCTE's premier research journal, Research in the Teaching of English, from 1991 to 1997, and she has published extensively in professional journals and written several books. There she is. Dr. Stotsky, you there?
I am here.
Yes.
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I have first a quick word for the parents and the legislators who just spoke, both at the state and federal level. We have a very honorable concept in American history called civil disobedience, and I think parents should be able to exercise their right to this concept in opting their students' children out of school on the day that either Common Core testing is being done or pilot testing is being done. They should be able to exercise their judgment as parents. This would be especially relevant for parents of those students with learning disabilities. And I think there might be enabling legislation at both the state and federal level that would ensure that parents could exercise their judgment about opting out without any penalty accruing to their children's absence for these tests. That's my first suggestion. My second relates to something that was mentioned much earlier by an earlier speaker about all of the private interests that have been funding the various aspects of Common Core, its development, its distribution, its promotion, all the propaganda that we actually now see and hear. And many people are willing to overlook these efforts by private corporations, and particularly one particular foundation, because they have been led to believe that these standards are rigorous, competitive, internationally benchmarked, research-based. They are not. We have been a very poor set of national standards. And a good part of the problem we are facing in the schools is to dig ourselves out from under the various constraints that we have found ourselves caught up in by these very definitely not first-class standards. A lot of people would not begrudge paying extra tax money for really first-class educational facilities and curriculum materials. What we have is so far from it that it is throwing good money at bad to support it. But let me just explain very quickly for English language arts why they are inferior to what many states had already, including New York's own previous English language arts standards. First of all, most of their English language arts standards are not really standards. They are content-free skills, and a content-free or free-floating skill can be applied to anything from the Three Little Pigs to Moby Dick. There is nothing to guide the test developers necessarily or teachers in their judgment about what specific text the curriculum should offer. A second flaw is a huge one. It is that Common Core stresses writing more than reading at every grade level. There are more standards for writing objectives than there are for reading objectives. And as every good teacher knows, writing is dependent on reading. All good writers have been good readers, and there's 100 years of research to back that up. Students will be spending a great deal of time trying to work on writing, and it will be mainly a waste of time in their certainly early classrooms. Another flaw is that these writing standards are often developmentally inappropriate, and this is very true at early grade levels and in the middle school, where young students are asked to come up with claims which they do not understand because they have not had any coordination with readings that would show them what a claim in an informational text is. And this leads to the next flaw. That is that English teachers are expected to spend at least half of their reading instructional time at every grade level from K to 12 on something called informational text. And this is not the kind of material that English teachers have been trained for that will actually develop critical thinking, which is one of the big buzzwords to be promoted by those advocates of Common Core. If we are to figure out where critical thinking gets developed at all, it comes from learning to read between the lines of complex literary texts. They are going to be reduced, and something called informational text will be taking its place. What those are will vary from school to school, class to class. You will not have a common curriculum or a very high-level curriculum. Parents need to find out what informational text their students are being asked to read. Finally, we have another buzzword or mantra to tackle. Common Core is frequently described as having standards that are fewer, clearer, and deeper. Well, they aren't. They just look fewer because many different objectives or activities have been bundled incoherently into one standard. And I'm going to give you one quick example so you'll know what I'm talking about. I was trained as an academic researcher, and I always provide examples. And anyone who wants to see more examples or details for all the points I have mentioned can go to my homepage, the University of Arkansas. All you do is Google Sandra Stotts, Arkansas, and it will be one of the very first items to pop up. But here is a grade 9 or 10 standard. It asks students to determine a theme or central idea of the text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details, and also write an objective summary of the text. This is a wretched sentence. No good English teacher would have ever allowed a sentence like that through any piece of composition. It is the jumble of at least 3 different activities: determining a theme, analyzing its development, and summarizing a complete text. So that's how we get fewer Common Core standards. So to finish up my little talk here, remember that Common Core standards are not rigorous. They're going to be told to you by the media, who do not know how to read standards, that Common Core standards are more demanding, but they don't know how to read a set of math and English standards. Common Core standards are not internationally benchmarked. I have been asking since I was on the Common Core's validation committee what countries we were internationally benchmarked with, and could never get the name of one country's set of standards. We are not comparable to high-achieving countries. So we have to either revise these standards thoroughly or simply abandon them before we spend any more money on them, because the amount of money we have already spent for professional development is basically a waste of money. I will conclude here because there is much more detail that could be said, but cannot do 1 or 2 minutes. I'll sign off right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stotsky. Thank you. Appreciate you being with us tonight.
Pardon? She signed off? Okay.
So I think what we'll do, we'll go to Jim in a few minutes, all right? So let's go kind of back to the folks here, and next on my list was Meredith Gavin. Is Meredith here? Come on up. Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure.
Hi, Meredith.
Thank you for doing this. I'm a little nervous.
Don't be nervous. I kept Pete way down here, so don't be nervous. He doesn't bite.
So, I've emailed most of you, and I addressed John King at the forum, and I asked him a couple of questions, which I've emailed over and over and never got a response. John McDonald was the only one who continually engaged with me. My question was posed to him is why children who are delayed in reading are required to take the same exact test as their peers. We all of us are here because we're all passionate about pieces of the Common Core and Race to the Top and APPR and In Bloom. And my personal concern right now is the high stakes testing as it pertains to special ed kids. King has repeatedly said, that this is all supposed to be controlled at the district level. Have we all not heard that? And yet, the choice for my child to take a test that is not appropriate to measure what he knows is taken away from me. I don't have that choice. The district and I don't have the choice to come together and decide what is appropriate for him to measure what he actually knows. Instead, a test is placed in front of him that he may not be able to read because he is delayed in reading. And I speak in terms of my son, but this applies to the majority of children with special needs. So, I understand, I have a couple of questions, and I didn't really write anything out, it's just kind of thoughts. I understand that this money is connected to the Race to the Top money that we accepted. And I don't follow politics, so I don't know the story behind this. But my question when that was said to me was, well, didn't we ask the question, how does this impact special ed kids? And if we did, shame on us for taking the money. And if we asked that question and chose to ignore it, shame on us for taking the money. Because in the meantime, there is an entire community of special ed children that are not being tested properly to monitor what they know and what they don't know. They are going to get lost. I understand that we are going to be requesting a waiver for 2% of the children in New York State to be tested at their instructional level instead of their grade level. My question is, when is that going to be released? Because I want to read the waiver, because I want to know who determines who qualifies for this 2%. And do they realize that this doesn't cover all the children where they aren't able to read the test at this level? That needs to be said. In the meantime, April is a few months away. So what's the plan? There isn't one. So in the meantime, most children with IEPs have accommodation where they get double test time or time and a half. So the tests are between 70 to 90 minutes. You expect a child to sit in a test for 3 hours and take a test they can't even comprehend. And I don't have a choice as a parent to refuse this. I actually am in a district where there couldn't be any more loveliness being presented to people who are refusing the test. So I don't understand why superintendents don't allow parents to do that. I don't understand it. So the answer isn't, I can't wrap my head around why it has to be difficult for parents to be able to provide a letter to a superintendent on behalf of a child that, one, is developmentally delayed, and two, if a test is placed in front of them, They don't know how to refuse. They don't know that process. They're brought up to respect their teachers and to do what they're told. So you're putting the burden of refusing a test on a child who is developmentally delayed. That is so backwards. The faith that I have in the education system as it relates to John King and the Board of Regents is zero. And all the special ed children are going to get screwed because of this. So I know that I'm very angry because there is no common sense here. There is no common sense for the special ed kids to not be able to take a test that is appropriate to measure what they know. And wait, I have one more thing. So, so what happens if this waiver is not approved? What is Plan B?
You want me to answer?
Sorry, yes.
I'll take turns jumping in.
Okay. Let me answer this a couple ways. I mean, the Senate came out the other day with a bunch of recommendations. All right. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But sort of like, look, we've done 10, 11, this is our 11th forum, and we've listened to parents. And from what I've seen is, number one, for an average student, most of the curriculum is not appropriate. It's not age appropriate, not developmentally appropriate. But there are no rubrics either for kids with disability. And there are no rubrics for kids that are advanced learners. And in my opinion, if you wanted to destroy public education, this would be a good model for it, okay? That being said, and I've said it in other forums, this is an election year, okay? Call your representatives. Tell them this is your number one issue. And what I can say to you, I have a petition out there that goes right to the governor's office, all right? And over 21, close to 21,000 people have signed this petition and sent it to a letter to the governor saying, put the brakes on, stop, all right? And there's a Dr. Rella that has been very eloquent with it, and he said, stop it, fix it if you can, and if you can't fix it, scrap it. Now, the one thing I would tell you is that, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, everybody else will speak for themselves, if you know that this isn't working, okay, why do we keep pushing it, all right? And I think everybody's got to get, I don't know if you heard, but the governor said that he doesn't have anything to do with education. Have you heard that? And if you believe that, please come talk to me later. I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, really cheap, hardly used, okay? You'll see this paperwork out front. It gives you all the contact information for the governor, right? Can I suggest you reach out and touch him? Call him, email him, tweet him, Facebook him, and tell him your story. Tell him how this is affecting your child. Tell them how it's affecting your home. Tell them how it's affecting your classroom and your school. In my opinion, what we need to do is we need to put the brakes on. We need to stop, okay? And what we need to do is bring educators into the room. And we need, people that deal with kids with special ed. And if the idea is to have a set of standards, all right, as an outline, that's fine. We do have certain school districts. You'll hear some superintendents go, very few, but you'll hear a couple say, we love Common Core. Greatest thing. But then when I usually question them about it, which part of it do you like? Is it the math? Well, we don't use the math. Okay. Well, did you rewrite the curriculum in any way? And they go, oh yeah, we brought our teachers in, we rewrote everything. So let me get this straight. Basically, you're not using Common Core. So you like the title of it, okay? But, you're not using it. So what I can say to you is I think that whoever wrote this never spent a day in a classroom, I think whoever wrote this never had a child that was a special ed student, okay? And I don't think that these people collectively were actually brought in to help write this curriculum. So personally, what I believe is everybody joins together and everybody yells enough, then the bottom line is they have to put the brakes on this. They have no choice. But, you know, as far as building a plane in the sky, you know, as we're flying it, this is, and I said today, I think I put it on Facebook, that I have Marilyn Tish and I have King running, they're like the two idiots running around on a Titanic, that after they just hit the iceberg, saying, listen, this ship can't sink, okay? And I think they're wrong, and I think that when we go back in January, our main goal is to put the brakes on this nonsense and actually bring educators to the table, right? And let's see how we can fix, if we can fix, and if we can't fix it, scrap it. And I mean, do we have superintendents here? Any superintendents? And what's your graduation rate here? 96%. 96%? Can you tell me what's broken? That needed to be fixed?
Meredith, you can see why we love Al on the floor of the Assembly. We have a lot of fun with Al. Just a couple of things, and on the issue of the testing and the waiver, one thing I would say to everyone who's here, we know enough about a broader range of subjects, enough to be dangerous, so we're always working on getting up to speed on the expert, to be at expert level on any issue. So we do have teams of we're like Verizon, we have teams of researchers and policy folks, budget folks behind us. So if there are questions here that come up, like the 2% waiver, we're just going to make sure we identify staff, make sure that you leave your contact information, because we're learning as we go along too. So thank you for highlighting that piece. Back to your other point about the parental consent, I share your frustration, and again, I have 4 young people. My youngest is a high school senior this year, all educated K through 12 in one small rural school in Schoharie County, and where I'm a graduate as well. And the issue of parental consent to me is a huge issue that has been chipped away at over time. And I think part of, in our deliberation on Common Core, I think there has to be a separate message, clear message to institutions. Hey folks, we're their parents. Wake up. We pay for them, we feed them, we clothe them, we educate them, we care for them, and we have a responsibility. They're underage minors, for their health care, for their education, and we reserve the right as parents, P.S., facious bureaucracy, we're the parents, to opt in, opt out, and care for our children. That's our responsibility. So you hit it right on the head. We heard it also from Monica, the same thing. So the parental rights piece, too, we want to emphasize, and that gets back to health care and any number of things. We can't ask for our child's health records at age 12. What's that all about? You know, all sorts of things like that. So I do want to say all of us share your anger. And again, we keep it contained because we're up here on the panel. We're not supposed to explode as much.
Yeah.
But we share that anger and frustration. And you have a bureaucracy that's running headlessly around and expecting that they can hide. And Al's point's perfect. It's perfect because the bureaucracy hides. So you have the commissioner who's appointed by the regents, who's appointed by individual members of the legislature, all right, majority, and behind that is the governor and the administration. So if the bureaucracy is not responding, we go over the top. So his point's well taken. The governor's there, we're here, and we put brakes on this. If it doesn't work, and this goes back to the gentleman who asked about the federal funding. You know, the funding came because we in New York State were facing a budget deficit. This was broached to the legislature. Well, here's $700 million, will help, it's going to help education. The language, as you heard from Laney, was very broad. There was no descriptive analysis. There was no detailed content of how the rollout would occur. This is almost like other federal and state initiatives that happen very broadly, and they make it up as they go along. And that's why, as you heard from our colleagues here, this is Civics 101. We, the people, say, knock it off, bureaucracy. Be responsible to us. You Government responds to the people, not people responding to the government. And that's what we're here for today. So thank you for being so passionate. Thank you.
Meredith, I was just going to make one other point. You can, you certainly don't need to sit up here to get it, though, but as I said earlier, I think we went off track when we made these standards. And again, I draw a contrast. I certainly believe in a life of accountability, but I trust my local level that they're going to be where the accountability is. So I think that what we should have had was goals. Goals, I think, are helpful. Now, with regard to the specific standard, my understanding is on the books now it's 1% in terms of IEP. And in the House, in legislation, we moved it to 4% this past year. Now, the Senate has not yet moved. So that would be a relief, but to get there, we need the Senate to pass a bill on the floor and then to get to conference so that we can work this out. Again, I think we'd be better moving from standards to goals, but in the meantime, getting that number moved north certainly would be more realistic. And by the way, with regard to goals, I think before we'd go final on the goals, you know, as Al mentioned, we would bring in our professionals.
But the 4%, the 1% that you're talking about is the alternative portfolio assessment.
Right.
There's no middle ground. You either take this test that you may
Yeah.
or may not be able to read, or you have an alternative portfolio assessment. Where is the middle?
Yeah.
Because my child doesn't qualify for that.
Well, and like I said, I oppose the whole thing in its entirety. But as we work towards how the state's going to address this, what I'm trying to do at the federal level is pull the pressure off the state. Because, you know, just sort of what has been alluded to, I mean, the state ended up opting to go this direction. I don't think the federal government should have ever made this an option. I think we were misguided in our federal legislation because what ends up happening is it becomes an unfunded mandate. We had a school district not far from here that won $32,000 worth of Race to the Top, and it was going to cost them $100,000 to implement it. So that's really that's an unfunded mandate. That's basically the school district saying we agree to spend $100,000, of which $32,000 will come from someplace else, but everything else is going to come from our taxpayers. So. I don't know if anybody else wants to take that on because that is a local decision. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think we'll
Yeah,
get to all
well-
that. I think I got to be the bad guy a little bit and try to move things along so we can get to everybody's comments.
Well, let me just get to one. Understand that out of the 700 million, we've taken 500 million. And my understanding is if we were to withdraw right now, we wouldn't get 200 million. Okay? It's not, you know, they'll tell you, well, they'll come back and claw back the 500 million. My understanding is, and what they've done in other places, is you will not get the remainder of the money. But notice what the Board of Regents did the other day. They gave you the price tag for this, okay? Because they're requesting an additional $1.3 billion. And that's how much in the school budget. And that's how much it's going to cost us to implement this. And a lot of that's being pushed on the schools. So if you talk to any superintendent, right, they might have got $10,000, but it cost them $100,000 to implement. So it's kind of like stepping over a dollar to pick up a dime. And all of our federal representatives, I seriously don't think that they're going to allow, okay, the federal government to claw back $500 million when we implemented most of it. But the problem is, it's not working. So understand that this is the stick and the carrot. The federal government, what they can do is they can offer us a program and say, if you do this, we'll give you money, right? The state can say, no, thank you. We don't want it, okay? Because the federal government's not supposed to have really anything to do with education. Usually it's under the state government. So what I'm trying to say is, look, it's not worth the money. Okay, you know, I've labeled this as state-sponsored child abuse because it's hurting the children of this state, and it's hurting education, and it's hurting teachers. And the bottom line is that's why I'm saying to the state, stop, pull back. You know, if you're worried about the money, you can save $1.1 billion by not implementing it, okay? Let them keep the $200 million. So hopefully that answered your question.
Right, so many of us feel at this point that it's the tail wagging the dog. So chasing the money and inflicting damage to our children and a whole generation. So many of us are inclined to say, just take it back, scrap it, we'll continue setting policy in New York State as we see fit.
Yeah, I think at this point it would be money well spent to give it back. But I don't know any superintendent that I've spoken to. Well, I don't know any superintendent I know that says they got more than what it cost them to get. So is Paul Snyder here? Paul is up next.
Thank you for letting me speak my mind. I originally had all kinds of notes here, and I was going to read from them, but as I'm listening to the different speakers, and they're much more eloquent and articulate than I can be, I'm just going to tell you some experiences I've had in Ballston Spa, where I live. My first exposure to Common Core was reading an article in one of the local news releases that stated that about 20 years ago, this same set of guidelines, or curriculum, if you want to call it that, had been proposed on a federal level and introduced by a group of people at the federal level. And of course, when they looked at the program, the senators realized that this was not good, even though it was very politically correct and couched in lovely prose and lofty explanations, that it wasn't what they wanted for the children of this country. They were so dead set against it that they actually wrote a bill. It was called Senate Resolution 66, that basically outlawed any implementation of this, what's now called Common Core curriculum. The vote was 99-1. So here you have a 100-member Senate voting 99-1 to establish a bill to prohibit this curriculum from ever being adopted by the federal government. There are also 3 separate laws that have been in place since about 1964 that prohibit the federal government from sticking their fingers into state-level educational systems. That's one of the reasons why this program is now called Common Core State Standards. It couldn't be called Common Core Federal Standards because it would be against the law at 3 different levels of a federal law. So they've conveniently dropped those titles of curriculum guidelines and said, no, we're going to call it state guidelines, state law. For about 16 years, I was a church assignment speaker with the Gideon's International Ministry in my county. I'm used to speaking to very large audiences. Wish there were more people here tonight. That's part of the problem. Enough people don't know about this Common Core curriculum that's coming down the pike. Meetings weren't scheduled, and I'm sure as state legislatures, probably most of you weren't informed when this was first trying to be instituted for development and implementation in New York State. Were any of you taken aside and was it shown to you, this is what we'd like to do, this is a great program, we want to get this going in the state? Was there any assembly discussion or any state assembly or state senate discussion on this subject? Probably not.
I wasn't in office.
No, to answer your question.
Yeah.
Again, the best analysis is this was hatched behind closed doors with a bureaucracy.
Right.
And then launched in the middle of the night, and then we're dealing with the consequence.
Right.
And that's why we're here today, because we're concerned, and that's why we're holding hearings across the state for this reason. We're learning.
Right.
I just learned some new things from you today.
Yeah, then you weren't aware of where the money, there's that old saying, follow the money. You want to know what the problem is, follow the money? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, okay? That was the foundation that everybody said didn't want to mention. Here's a man that, he's a proponent of eugenics. He leans towards socialist ideas, him and his wife, and they have literally thrown hundreds of millions of dollars, and believe me, folks, money speaks loudly to someone who needs it or desires it. They've thrown hundreds of millions of dollars into this Common Core curriculum. And you've got to scratch your head and say, well, why would that be? Well, they probably stand to make a lot more money coming back to them, because not only have they thrown over $200 billion into the Common Core, into the flagship called Common Core, but they've also purchased several companies surrounding educational needs, book publishers, standards and data collection agencies. They've purchased several of these, okay? So you got to understand where this is coming from. Another problem I have with this Common Core is that the people who inputted most of this information that they're going to use in Common Core, all right? Are you familiar with the name of William Ayres or his wife, Bernadine Dorn? Does those two names ring a bell with anyone here? How about Linda Hammond Darling? Yeah. A 60s and 70s radical along with Mr. Ayres and his wife, Miss Dorn. It is said, and I can't prove it, but I've read probably a dozen articles concerning his hand, which is said to be all over the Common Core curriculum because it's his style of instruction. And his style of instruction was, if I can get a hold of just your children for just 4 years, I can change the world. I can change the political, economic system in this country. I can do with it as I please. About 50 to 60% of Common Core content has Mr. Ayres and Ms. Dorn's fingerprints all over it. Their style, their ideas, their ideology, and for any of you who aren't familiar with their ideology, I think some of the news media like to call them unrepentant terrorists, but that's in fact what they are. These people were federal felons. They were arrested and charged with murder and bombing the Pentagon, bombing police stations. Just the kind of people that you'd want to have an input in your child's education, which now you're kind of thinking, well, what direction could that be in? Mr. Ayres is quoted as saying that it's a perfect seed bed. Common Core, a perfect seed bed for indoctrination. Okay? And what do you suppose that indoctrination would be, considering this man's ideology? Most likely socialist leaning. So, I mean, I know that I sound a little bit like one of these right-wing conspiracy lovers, but this, folks, you can't lie awake at night and make this stuff up. If you want to research this and look into it and study it, the more you do, the angrier you're going to get, and the more bizarre it gets, to the point where you've got to say, this can't happen in my country. This is the United States of America. This can't happen here. Wake up. It's happened. And I hope it's not too late. But I just wanted you to be aware of its origins, all right, and the start of it. And it's, in my mind, it's an insidious evil that we don't need to fix it. We don't need to put a Band-Aid on it. We need to scrap it and move it out of this country, because it is a bad, bad way to educate our children. And yes, I do have some horses in the races. I have 4 grandchildren that go to school in New York, and I'm deeply, deeply concerned for them, and of course my kids, the parents of those kids. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't need to read facts and figures. I don't need to give you all kinds of dates and things like that.
you.
Understand where it's coming from, understand what their intent is, and you'll vote it out of here very quickly.
Thank you very, very much, Paul. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next on my list is Katie. Is Katie here? I might mess up that last name. How do you say that, Katie? Zimmer. Yeah, I got the wrong Katie. Katie Zimmer. Yes, yes. Sorry, Katie. Katie, you're on there too, but 2 Katies later.
Good evening. My name is Katie Thimmener. I come here tonight as a concerned parent on behalf of my children. Since my children are minors and cannot necessarily speak for themselves, it is my duty as their parent to be their voice. Unfortunately, the Department of Education, with the assistance of the federal government, has eviscerated the laws regarding the Family, Education, Rights, and Privacy Act, or FERPA, to make it possible to gain much more information and data on our children, teachers, and parents without our consent. This data will be sent from the State Ed Department to InBloom and put on a cloud, which they cannot guarantee its safety and security. In order to gain access to our children's medical records, the laws regarding HIPAA have been changed to allow for medical information to be shared with an entity considered to be a business associate. These 2 things alone diminish my rights as a parent to protect the privacy of my children and attempts to lessen my ability to be a voice for my children. As any parent would know, this is not acceptable. At the beginning of this school year, I called for a meeting with both of my children's principals to share my concerns about Common Core. They behaved as if they knew very little about Common Core, except about what they are doing in their own schools to implement it. Several weeks later, I posted a few links from the commissioners' forums on one of my children's PTA Facebook pages and was immediately blocked. After 2 weeks of having my emails ignored, a few phone calls, and talking in person with the PTA president and principal, they have decided that because Common Core is political, they will not allow me to have a parent voice and share my concerns with members of the PTA and parents in the district. When I attempt to talk to teachers in my district, I am met with a reluctance to speak or neutrality regarding Common Core. I am told I should share my concerns with the Board of Education and the superintendent. When I do, which I have often, it falls on deaf ears, or I'm told I'm a minority. As far as being a minority in my district, please let it be known that there was only 1 Common Core meeting held last February. Recently, there have been Common Core PTA meetings, which are a sham because the NPTA has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to promote and endorse Common Core. It is my opinion that because we are a pilot district for the SLOs, or Student Learning Objectives, and APPR, that like much of Common Core in general, in order for it to have gotten as far as it has, it had to be implemented with little knowledge. In order for our district to have this pilot program go smoothly and be considered exemplar, information had to be withheld from parents and the community. Essentially, we were kept in the dark while our children's data, privacy, minds, and futures are being stripped away from them, while at the same time robbing parents of their natural right to protect their children. Again, this is not acceptable. I would like to end with a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I might be pronouncing that wrong. "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. To not speak is to speak. To not act is to act." Thank you for listening to our concerns and grievances, and I appreciate the time you have taken to be here.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie, guys? Katie, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. It is a common theme, the lack of parental rights throughout this Common Core fiasco. Just to give you a heads up, next is we have the other Katie. Katie, where's Katie? Katie Zahedi. And then I have Nadine Cragen on the list, and then Mary Boykin, just to kind of give you the lineup. And then a few more after that as well.
Thank you for having this meeting. It is so welcome to have the opportunity to speak to representatives. I'm really grateful to be here. I did, when I came to understand that the route to address issues with the Common Core, with excessive standardized testing, and with what's going on within the state education department was through the assembly. I went to meet my local assemblyman, and he talked about how you've been reticent to take over education. And I said, Kevin, don't worry, that's already done. We have had a corporate takeover of public education, and it's being dismantled right now. So this is a time for us to work together and to ensure that we do something to stop the dismantling of public education. I'm concerned because what I found from the beginning as this was rolling out was that any questions, any concerns, just as what Katie, the last Katie that was up here expressed, anytime concerns are raised, simple questions will make one a radical. You're considered a radical to ask simple, important questions about what's going on in the schools. And I am really embarrassed with the infatuation with data, with the way so-called facts are thrown around, and there's no way to address these things unless we're able to take a look at what's happening inside state education departments. So I just want to say that there's a penetration of this technocratic reform logic that is somehow put across as it's a truth. I've been a teacher. I've raised 4 children. My youngest just graduated from high school. I have a PhD in education policy. I visited schools in Finland. I'm a principal. I've been in the same high-performing school for 12 years. And what came out with the rollout of Common Core is that I was put into a room to be trained by young people from the BOCES or dispatched from state ed with papers that still had drafts stamped across them to be trained to evaluate. Inside state education at this time, there are people who are running the show who have no sincere interest in actually ever being an educator. They're called fellows. And when you think fellows, you'll think a dignified elder person with experience. No, these are very young people, marvelously confident considering their no experience, and they have taken the work of the employees in state education office, and they've relocated them into program offices all over Brooklyn, Queens, and so forth. This foil, which I will provide to the panel, is from the employees inside the state education department, the people who were experienced to work with us. When we used to call state ed, we would reach them and we would ask them questions about math. They no longer have any work. Their work has been sent out to be done by these fellows. And this foil has been ignored. They were given 5 days. That was 2 months ago. So I will, leave a little stack of them here. Other unusual things that came from state education department. You've heard how unacceptable the Common Core curriculum is, which isn't a curriculum. But also the assessments. When I saw this letter, I'll explain what it is. As a principal, I had one person at my door, the phone was ringing, my secretary was sending me something, I opened the letter, and I said, oh my God, is it possible? 2 logos, State Education Department, Pearson Corporation. Dear principal, your school will be participating in blah, blah, blah. Here's what you do. And with instructions that if I have questions to call Pearson Corporation. When we had trouble with the scoring of the test and we said the anchor sheets were wrong, if you'd like you can look at it, the anchor sheets were incorrect, we dialed the number for State Education Department, the official number. It was on a trunk line to Pearson Corporation. Pearson Corporation, may I help you? There are 3 correct answers for question 36. Oh, don't worry, it's B. And this happened a few times, and finally they said, listen, we've already checked with State Education Department, just do what we say. At that point, I had to excuse my non-consequentialist teachers who couldn't do that and bring in substitutes to do the work. So the situation we have is there's a shadow New York State Education Department that is being run by a very few individuals, and I will tell you who they are. Meryl Tisch, who has very little experience in education. She's a very wealthy woman and probably has excellent intentions. That's my guess. But her main qualification is that she has a lot of money and a lot of connections. She hired these fellows, and when this first came out, I met with her. I went down to Long Island. I met with her with 5 other principals, and we asked her, we sat knee to knee at a little table in a library in Southside High School on Long Island, and we asked her why they were pushing for the APPR to go through. And she said this, and I think any legislator will be furious to know, this is a direct quote. She said, how would you like to be in my position? At the governor's mansion, he's shouting at me, put this through or I will get 3 geniuses in a room and I will force it down your throat. So my understanding is that the governor is not supposed to be influencing education that way, and if he has that amount of power, the question asked earlier is where is he now? We are really, really concerned with what's happening. I am embarrassed with what's happening. When I meet with European people, I'm interested in comparative education. I did go to Finland with a study tour of principals and researchers. We went through every segment of the Finnish school system to try to understand what they were doing that was helping them succeed. We met with teachers, we went to the teacher preparation programs, we met with their unions, we met with parents. I told our host, I would like to meet the parliament. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, he called the parliament, he said, well, we can go over there now. We met with the Minister of Education and Culture. And what I noticed in Finland that was so remarkable is that the secret to their success is not that their teachers are better. Their teachers looked very much like the teachers that I have in Red Hook. In fact, I think my teachers might have been a little bit better in a number of ways. They were more relaxed, which was a good thing, but our teachers are really very well prepared. What they do have is they have a government that supports education, they have respect for teachers, and they have a very cooperative way of being. When I presented personally to the Minister of Culture, I said, well, what would happen if principals were this upset in Finland? What would you do? She said, well, that would simply never happen because we have too much respect, we have too much of a shared vision, and if anyone has a problem, we would come to a consensus on that. So we're talking about standards, and what I want to know directly from our legislators, because you're overseeing New York State Education Department, is while we're enforcing standards on schools and we're evaluating teachers, why don't we evaluate the employees at State Education Department? Why do we allow Steiner and Tisch to bring in a young man, a 35-year-old man as a commissioner? A 35-year-old man is barely qualified to be an assistant principal. I'm 56 years old, and if John King applied to my school, he'd be considered as an assistant principal. I would train him, but he would have to listen, and he would have to be ready to serve. It was a cynical move. It was clearly to manage him, and what we need now are standards. There should be no commissioner in New York State that has not served as a principal, that has not served as a teacher, that has not worked at that level. Yeah, I'll give you copies. So I'm so pleased that you came to listen, and the thing that is so touching is that we feel that you're really listening. And what we've encountered all along is the no response response, as if our concern for our schools is a burden. And I'm so happy with the sincerity that I see in your faces, and I really hope that there will be an inquiry as to what's going on in State Education Department, that the fellows will be dismissed immediately, and that the money that's being spent there, so far, $28 million, and I know this is the amount that has been spent up until this month, on Common Core modules which have been described as optional, supplemental materials by John King. Thank you so much.
Hang on
We
one
feel
second,
it.
Katie. Thank you. I'm sure there's a couple of questions.
There are.
Yeah. Eddie? You got any?
Well, I just want, I mean, you brought up some very good points regarding, you know, state ed and all of that, because, you know, as many people might know, the commissioner is appointed by the Board of Regents, and, you know, there's many layers to how this all occurs, and through these forums, we've had an opportunity to talk to a couple of the regents, and you may have seen in the news the last few days, some of the very few amount of our regents that do have education experience seem to be the ones that are starting to raise questions on this. It's the one, and it's the ones that have education experience that are raising these questions, and that are less likely to kind of just go along with things. And you know, one of the things that we've proposed a few times, I had the opportunity on behalf of our Minority Leader Brian Kolb to put a motion to discharge, which is a procedural move to try to get a bill to the floor last year that would kind of revamp this whole regent system and require a supermajority vote to appoint any of these folks and all this other stuff. Because you're right, there should be standards, and certain minimal standards that somebody needs to hold in terms of experience before they're setting the educational policy for our entire state, whether it be as a regent or as a commissioner. So you raise great points here, and I'd love maybe the opportunity at some point to sit down with you and discuss further some ideas that we can put forth as recommendations for reforming the, you know, Education Department and the Board of Regents.
Thank you. And most of us have called the regents. I wrote to Betty Rosa this morning and thanked her for her article in the Times Union. I spoke with Harry Phillips numerous times. Regent Tillis has been very supportive. But what we do know is that of the 18 involved, 17 do not have children or grandchildren in public schools. So that should be one thing that's considered. And we would hope that all appointees to the regent position would have to state their positions publicly.
Well, let me get your opinion on this. After doing this is the 11th forum, one of the things that I'm looking to introduce, and there's a copy of it with this right here, is to actually make the position of the regents an elected position. Mm-hmm. There's 13 judicial districts throughout New York State, and usually we have one regent from each judicial district. Mm-hmm. Then we have 4 at large. So what this would actually do is say that a regent, it's a 4-year term, and the chancellor for the regents is voted on by the 13 regents, which would take the governor out of it and the other politicians out of it. And the person that wants to run for a regent would have to come in front of everyone here and say, here's what I'm looking to do, here's what I offer, right, and run for the position. I was wondering, what do you think on that type of?
Anything to bring some air into it would be helpful. It's so mysterious how this is led, and if it was opened up to daylight, it would really help. There are so many qualified educators throughout the state. To think that we have things happening behind closed doors that we don't know about is not acceptable. Anything to move in that direction would definitely be helpful.
Well, you understand, out of the regents we have, there's only, I think, 3 of them that have actually taught in the classroom out of 17. Mm-hmm. There's 3 that have taught out in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I think Rosa's one, Tillis is the other, and, so you have 3 out of 17 that actually taught in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Right.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, Katie, I mean, the results speak for themselves. I mean, I think your school's in the top 10 across the state. And I'll tell you, if coming from the military, You can't even be a brigade commander till you're in your mid-40s. I don't care if you're a genius, you know? You just can't be it, because there are repetitive assignments of increasing responsibility that you have to succeed at before you'll even be a battalion commander, and much less a brigade commander. So, I mean, the idea that you're suggesting is one that's commonsensical.
Exactly.
You know?
What you've said is so important, because the novel, complex problems that you come upon, you cannot have a script for. So I'm sure John King, and I've met him, he seems like a very nice man. He has young children, but to think that he was put in that position is just cynical. At 35 years old, what do you know that you could actually deal with the complexity that happens in a principal's office daily, let alone at the state education department? It was clearly to manage him.
Katie, if I may, and thank you for sharing some of those insights. And in regard to your conversation with that other legislator, I guess the group of us here feel we need to dive in, and we're not hesitant. So we're full speed ahead. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
One question for you, and I was a little distressed, and I don't think I quite caught the entire recanting of the conversation you had with Regent Tisch.
Mm-hmm.
So could you?
Yes.
Could you just step through? I
Yes.
caught bits of it. I was
Okay.
writing furiously.
Let me explain. It's very important that you know
I'm a
this.
student, so I'm always writing stuff.
Okay.
But
Well, what had happened just prior to this meeting, it was
the meeting was where and with whom?
the week before APPR was signed into law. I was feeling very frustrated. I felt like our democracy is being hollowed out. Not only public schools are at threat, but our democracy is at threat. And I was sitting at my computer. I'd written letters everywhere, and all of a sudden, an email came up from Diane Ravitch. And I was, wow, I just led a book study with her book. And she said, I want to introduce you to someone down on Long Island, and it was Carol Burris. So I jumped in my car, went down to meet her, and Diane Ravitch was there, and we scheduled a meeting with Meryl Tisch. And very sincerely, we wanted to get in with her and help her understand why this is the wrong direction. So there were 5 principals. Regent Tillis was there as well, in Southside High School in the library, and that's the school that Carol is the principal of. Meryl Tisch came. We spent at least an hour and a half going over why this is a problem, knee to knee with some, she's a very wealthy woman. We have some crummy cookies, and we're telling her, this is not good for our kids. Even after the meeting, I gave her my card. I said, I know you're a bazillionaire. Here's my card. I will come anytime, any place if you need any information as to why this is dangerous for New York State. And she was frustrated. She was actually frustrated that we were so critical. Later she said to Diane that she'd never had a meeting like that, but she said, well, how would you like to be in my position? This is what she said to us. I'm at the governor's mansion, and he shouts at me that if you don't get this signed, if you don't get this through, I'll put 3 geniuses in a room and I will force it down your throat. And at that point I said to her, well, if you need someone to talk to him, I would be happy to speak with him too. We gave her all sorts of support. We said we'd be happy to speak with him. I'd written letters to him at that point. Many other principals had. I'm sure Tim did as well. I brought Tim down to meet Carol. But that's what she said, and it was surprising to me because there's this imposition of technocratic logic and this imposition of evaluations on teachers when politicians, excuse me, the problem in failing schools is what happens from 3 p.m. till 7 in the morning. So if Governor Cuomo is so sincere about changing the situations of students, he can look at Finland to see that they have really wonderful conditions in the community for kids. So rather than have politicians supervise teachers, I think to have teachers perhaps supervise him. When did politicians become more moral than teachers? I'm just wondering. So that's what she said to us. That's what she said to us. And it was very strange indeed. And we'd be happy to meet with him and talk with him.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Katie, thank you. Before you go, well, I don't want it to slip by anyone what Katie said. Anybody in this room that knows me knows I do not like this governor. I call him Governor Gutless for a reason. And this is a prime example of the way this thug operates. Those are harsh words, but so what? He operates in a thuggish, boorish manner all the time. APPR was done at around 3 in the morning. And I remember debating that bill. And I remember saying my wife Maggie's asleep because she's right here. She's got to get up and teach her class in a couple of hours. And what did he do? Had to be done 100 miles an hour. Nobody got to read the bill. And if you dare oppose him, he screams and he yells. So the way he operated with Merrill Tisch, who, by the way, I don't give that much of a pass to, because Merrill Tisch could say, you know what, I'm out of here, and I'm gonna let everybody know what's going on here. So she doesn't get a complete pass from me, nor does John King, certainly. But the way this governor operates with shoving everything he wants down the throats of New Yorkers, just like the SAFE Act, just like APPR, just like Common Core, 100 miles an hour with no thought to the ramification. It's only about him and his political future. And I don't want that to escape notice of this crowd or anybody that's going to be watching this. This is how this man operates. And the wheels are starting to come off for him because the people of New York are starting to wake up to his behavior and his self-serving attitude. So I thank you for bringing that up, because the way he operated with Merrill Tisch is exactly the way he operates with the legislature and the people of New York State. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much.
And lastly, it should infuriate anybody that there is a New York State education letterhead beside a Pearson letterhead. Next up, Nadine Cragen. Where's Nadine? All right. Thank you, Katie. And after Nadine will be Mary Boykin and then Michael O'Brien. All right, 1 second. I didn't realize John McDonald has joined us. Thank you very much, John. Did you? Thank you very much. Appreciate John being here. John, as I said earlier, John had another event to go to, but we appreciate you being up here. And John's wife is also a teacher here in Lansingburg. Thank you, John. That the APPR is the teacher evaluation in review. Yep. Yep. Just ask the teacher; they'll definitely tell you what APPR is.
Thank you for having this tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm just a parent. I've followed this Common Core for about 3 years. When a request for my son's Social Security number came home with a PSAT test that he was taking, and that's when the whole thing started, and you went to the Department of Education website, and anyways, that's how long I've been following it. All of my concerns have been so well addressed this evening, I won't take up a lot of your time. But I would ask you to, some of the best anti-Common Core information out there is on Pearson's website. There's one especially, Victoria's story, check that one out. But also, New York, engageny.org, which is the resource. I would encourage any parents to go in, they do it in every, like, you know, 3rd and 4th grade, 5th and 6th grade, pull off some of the assignments and watch how it is scripted. The teachers are scripted as to how to present the information, what to say, when to do what. One in particular that I looked at because my sons were older. I have one junior and one just graduated last year, but the 11th and 12th grade. Living Like Weasels. I just take a look at it. And at the end, the instructions, it even indicates, you know, a strong essay will indicate this. Students may also, the direction of the outcome of what they're even talking about is there for them. You talk to the teachers at school. I go in and every year I go in and talk to them. They don't know. They're in a box. So if we're going to do something about Common Core, it has to come from the legislature. we're going to lose some great teachers. Yes, we have lost great teachers, but that's going to continue. You talk to them in school, you know, if you had it to do over, knowing what you would be faced with as far as teaching, they shake their heads. I'm a small business person. The joke is, what year plan are you on? It's when my youngest is graduating. I mean, everybody is frustrated. And with all different aspects of it, the privacy aspect, the curriculum aspect, the testing. I mean, from anybody else, especially with our students with disabilities, that is abuse. And you walk into any middle school, especially high schools also, they're talking about eye care, they talk about respect, anti-bullying. This is bureaucratic bullying at its best. And how do you expect, on a state level, to get across that you're not supposed to bully when you're the one that's starting it from the top down? My son in 11th grade this year had a pre-test for English, and the essay was called "The Fallacy of Success," which kind of piqued my interest because that's not really where my focus is. But he was frustrated. He said, I don't even know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to analyze the author's definition of something, but the essay is all over the place. So naturally, I go in and I pull that off the internet. I knew exactly what he was saying. There isn't. We have great English teachers in our district, and there isn't one of them that would have submitted a piece of paper for publication. But the other part is that you can discuss any subject in class, but when you introduce testing like that, there's no discussion. What did you think of it? It wasn't a critical analysis. It was, how did the author do this? But the student is left with the fallacy of success. That's not why my son is there. And when you talk to the teachers, I had Common Core written all over it. So I asked them, and they said, sure enough, it was. And they're in a box. They are having to teach the students how to take the test at the end of the year. And the earlier discussions about opting out and not being able to opt out, school districts give you different responses. I want an opt-in, and I don't understand why, as a parent, with rights as a parent, why we can't get that, and why is that so difficult? Legislatively, why can't we get an opt-in? I don't know, I guess that's it. I'm frustrated like everybody else out here. I mean, I'm no different that way, but we don't know what to do because we understand that you're concerned about it, that you're focused about getting it repealed, but who else in those state legislatures? I mean, I don't know, when you talk about the state ed department or the governor, what kind of chance we have.
What I can say to you is when you started this and said that I'm just a parent, okay? The parents have been, I put the bill in to get a conversation going, to give something to rally behind, right? To withdraw from Common Core and raise to the top. And this has been a parent and an educator movement. And let me tell you, there's a lot of people that just wanted to ignore this whole topic. They wanted it to go away, right? But the people in this room and people like you who have stood up and lent your voice and said, no, we're not going away. This is abusive to our children. This is state-sponsored child abuse, We're not going to let you continue this. You have parents out there that have put their own money up, that have paid for forums. You have websites all over the place. The parents are the people, and the teachers and everyone else are the people that are going out and educating everyone else out there. By participating in a forum here tonight, you're educating us. You're telling us what you feel. All of this is getting put together, by the way, and we're going to be putting out our own report, right, and our own recommendations. And we're also going to be putting out our own agenda at the end here. So your participation here tonight, you came out tonight to speak to us and let us know what you were saying. So what I can say to you is, we as legislators, we're going to carry your voice up there. We're going to be loud. And like Steve said, and other people have said, the one thing we're not is shy, and the one thing we're not is quiet, okay? Especially Steve and I, you know. But let me assure you that you coming here tonight and just speaking from your heart, the best testimony that we've gotten are from parents and from teachers. And we're going to be putting that all together. And we're going to be talking to our colleagues. We've talked to our colleagues. We've gone all over the state. And your participation is important here. But remember, you look, we would have gotten nowhere if it wasn't for everybody out there that has stood up and said no more, all right? But what we need you to do is keep standing up, educating other people, and bringing more people into the fold. And I mean, all I can tell you is the other day there was a big thing on YouTube, on Facebook, that the governor's office were telling people that they haven't heard any complaints about Common Core. Nobody's called him. Nobody's given an opinion. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, I had over 21,000 people email you. So what I suggest again is, I'm going to go to this and give it to your friends, your neighbors. Where's Cuomo? You know, and reach out and call the governor, because he says nobody's calling him. All right, well, good. But what I'll tell you is, you're the ones that are moving this. You're the ones that are moving this ball. You're the ones that have, look, you think the Senate wanted to? The Senate wanted to bring up this topic? Have you seen the recommendations from the Senate? It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. It's not going to hack it. So, you know, call your senators and say, knock it off. We want out of this. All right, so I hope that answered your question.
It does, and I thank you all very much.
Yeah. Nadine, yes, thank you. I caught part of it, was conferring with my colleagues, and I can tell you, my region's 7 counties, and some of my colleagues have, you know, Chris has 11, the congressman. We're hearing the same thing, regardless of whether it's in the southern tier or the northern Catskills or the Capital District or Mid-Hudson. And what I find unique about this issue is, as all of us realize, our society's been more polarized. So we find ourselves divided into camps. But on this issue, regardless of philosophy, regardless of education, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of wealth, people are united on this issue. And I can tell you, when I bring young people to the Capitol, and we marvel at how, and you know, the state Capitol is a beautiful building, and the aura of it. And I'll say to these young people, I said, this is a magnificent building, isn't it? I said, it seems a great place. But I'll say, do you know where the power really is? And I'll look at them, and they'll start to smile at me. And they'll nod their heads, and they'll point to themselves. So that's really what this issue is about. This is empowerment. This is grassroots. This is having the people who care and are passionate engage. So don't discount your efforts. And Al is absolutely right. And as our colleague said, we're all here united. You know, regardless of party, regardless of where we come from, because we feel there's a serious problem here and it's threatening our future generations. So don't give up.
Okay.
Don't give up.
That is the one thing. I mean, it's across party lines, and on a deep level, it critical thinking skills are really what's at stake. And regardless of what end of the political spectrum you are at, everybody wants that. Everybody needs that, and it's destroying it. So thank you very much.
Nadine, thank you. Thank you, Nadine. You know, I would just say to Nadine and to everybody out there, I think one of the saddest things is disengaged parents, and maybe that's one of the most dangerous things out there is disengaged parents. But one of the most powerful forces on earth are parents that are engaged. And, you know, you had to look no further than Arnie Duncan's idiotic statement of a few weeks ago to see how quickly you can get the mother bears riled up in this country, and that goes for the fathers as well. So I would say stay engaged, and I think the mission of everybody here should be to make sure that you're educating those parents that are maybe naively trusting. They're putting their kids on the school bus in the morning and just saying, you know, the school's going to educate my child properly. I think that there's a lot of parents out there that just don't know yet how dangerous this is. So I think that should be all of our goals, to keep on educating our fellow parents. So next up is Michael O'Brien. Is Michael here?
I was glad to hear someone talk about the content of Common Core, because some of the things that I've seen is statements, it was like in English, they were teaching them how to do contradictions, and the statements that they were making were incorrect. One of the statements was about the president having to make the laws. He's so busy he has to make the laws of the land. He doesn't make the laws of the land.
Right.
It was a very insidious way that they get information to kids to think that, oh, the president makes the law. But it was just teaching contradictions.
Yep.
So there are very many ways that incorrect information is in that curriculum.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Is Michael here? Michael O'Brien? Oh, I'm sorry. Mary is next, and then Michael. I was jumping ahead. So Mary, then Michael. Sorry about that, Mary. I jumped ahead. So I got Mary, Michael, and then Susan Romier after that.
Thank you for letting me do this, and I've never done this before, so bear with me. I really didn't know what I was going to say today because I called on Monday and was very surprised to be able to get a speaking slot. And I'm a working single mother with 2 children at home in 2 different schools, and one is in public school and has special needs. And so I have had pretty much 0 time to prepare. However, my 9-year-old son in 3rd grade in Ballston Spa School District brought home a math test today that gave me the material I needed. I'd like to share it. He failed the math test. He's never failed a math test before. And I honestly believe a good part of the reason for the failure is, as someone else here, I think Monica, if she's still here, was saying, he cannot read and process the information on the test in order to come up with a viable answer. He is currently so frustrated with math that he threw the holiest meltdown fit yesterday morning, or was it Monday morning, that there should be no school because there was, or was it Tuesday? It was Tuesday. There should be no school yesterday because it snowed on Monday. And he was adamant there was going to be no school, absolutely no school. There cannot possibly be snow. They couldn't have cleaned the roads well, or couldn't be school. They couldn't have cleaned the roads well enough. And because he just doesn't want to go to school and do this anymore. I don't even know where I was going with that. He's just so frustrated right now. He's in a shutdown. And this is what children on the autism spectrum do. He has Asperger's. He's in a regular classroom, mainstreamed with other children in the 3rd grade. He has an aide that he shares with one other student that helps him get through the day, through every transition in his day. I'm, as a result of this test, about to ask to get someone to read tests to him. He can read, not on grade level, but he does read, but he can't read and process.
he can't do English and math together. That's too much. And anybody who is doing Common Core math homework with your children, they are asking you to do English and math at the same time. Look at the handwriting from my third grader. You can barely read it. I was listening to Monica, and I listed some hallmarks of children on the autism spectrum, if you'll bear with me. Number 1 is processing delays. Number 2, decreased executive function, both of which, processing and executive function, are required to do the things that they're asking these children to do in this Common Core math. Decreased problem-solving skills. If my son is given a solution to a problem in advance, he can solve the problem when it occurs. However, if he doesn't also have a plan B, he cannot come up with plan B on his own. There is no plan B in that child's world. He has fine and gross motor delays. He's not like his peers. His 7-year-old brother is well beyond him physically, agility-wise. They do karate together. My 9-year-old has an orange belt because he has a great karate instructor that gives him credit for his effort, not because he's orange belt material. And a huge one is anxiety. Anxiety is a huge hallmark of autism spectrum disorders. My child... Yes, it is, absolutely. And I, too, have considered putting my 9-year-old on some kind of anxiety medication so that he already, since October, has been saying, I'm worried about third grade testing. I'm worried about third grade testing. And now he has a therapist, an RDI, if you've ever heard of RDI, therapist who I talked to about this and said, I want to opt him out of testing. And she said, you should give that some deep consideration because the testing is what helps him to get and maintain the services he gets. So testing may or may, opting out may not be an option in order for him to maintain his diagnosis, his services that he's getting. Another thing with children on the spectrum, impaired communication and social skills. He can't tell them at school what's bothering them. He's incredibly verbal, but 90% of what the child says is scripted from something he's read in a book or something he's seen on TV. It's a direct quote from somewhere that he's plugged in where he deems it appropriate. His conversational skills, try to sit at the dinner table with this child and actually ask him how his day went. It is such a challenge for him, he can't sit still and say how his day was. Sitting down and having a 3-way conversation with my 2 sons at dinner is like pulling the tusks out of an elephant every night. It's incredibly challenging. And so he's holding it together in school. He's not having behavior issues right now because he's now 9 years old, Mom, and he knows how he's supposed to behave in school, and he holds it together in school at all costs. And then he comes home, and all hell breaks loose. He cannot hold it together any longer. And God forbid his little brother, who for the record goes to a private Montessori school, who meets Common Core standards without ever even really trying, because it's just such a different style of education. It's where both of my boys started out, but my older one cannot handle the independence and the executive function skills that are required to handle the Montessori curriculum. But God forbid my 7-year-old walk up and bother my 9-year-old when he's coming home and relieving all his anxiety by lining things up and talking to things. And don't dare mess with his lineup, because if you put anything out of that order, the world is going to come to an end. And this is what he needs to do every single day when he comes home. It's what helps him be able to handle going back the next day. When I said to him about this math test, which says he got 12 correct out of 23, and I said, Sam, you didn't do very well on your math test. And he said, I don't care. I hate math. He used to care. He doesn't care because this is too hard. And he has no way. It's too much. It's too much stuff. They're teaching him to try to figure out how much time has elapsed by using a number line. Why not give him a picture of a clock and teach him to count backwards by fives? Why do we need a number line? That's a whole different process. It doesn't make any sense, and he can't compute that. That's a plan B. He doesn't have plan Bs. And any behaviors that he is having when he's coming home, or even at school, any little things, social things or whatever that he's doing, these are not behaviors. He's a good kid. He's a brilliant kid. What these are his only way of coping. These are coping mechanisms because he doesn't know what else to do. And it's not as easy as just telling him like it is with my 7-year-old. It's just not that easy. He can't come up with this stuff on his own. So I guess what I'm saying is my child is not common. Common Core does not apply. And I pulled him out of a very good private school and put him in public school so that he could get the services he needed. And he's come an incredibly long way from when he was 6.5, and I did this. But I'm afraid we're going to lose ground. And then I don't know what I'm going to do. What are my other options? I can't homeschool him. Honestly, I don't have the patience to teach him at home. Plus, I need to work. I'm a single mom. So, what are my other options for this child if Common Core scares him right out of school? What do we do? He's not getting a lot of homework, but the problem is the 20 to 30 minutes of homework he is getting, for him, takes a lot longer. And right now, he's in a shutdown to the point where all he has to do is see the math page and he's rolling around on the floor screaming. I have a tutor one night a week who I've had for a while because my younger one doesn't really get homework unless he hasn't finished his assignments in school. And so it helps instead of just shooing my younger one out of the room because my older one's a one-on-one. So I have a tutor one night a week who comes in and sits and does it with him. The other nights it's on me, except Thursday nights Daddy gets it. And it really is. I'm shooing my younger one out of the room. Go find something to do. Go find something to do. Go find something to do. And I'm setting a timer. Seriously, Sam, if you can just get through 5 minutes, you could have a piece of candy. If anybody watches the show Parenthood, give them a piece of candy for doing the problem. And that's literally what it takes. I'm paying him to do the homework to get it done because he's just in such a shutdown. I'm modifying. I'm writing answers for him. If you can just tell me the answer, I'll write it. Because, they are actually asking questions, and it's not on this math test, but, blah, 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 this great big elongated word problem, and explain your answer. Not just give the answer, but explain your answer. I can't even think of an example. I was going to look for one, and I didn't have time. But literally, explain, a word problem with, say, Tom and Sue in it, and who was wrong, Tom or Sue? Explain why. You're putting English, you're putting writing, you're putting math, you're putting it all together, and you're asking this kid who can't come up with a plan B. I'm sitting there trying to help him, and I can't explain why. So, and I'm college educated, and I cannot do 3rd grade math homework anymore. So, I guess that's what I have to say.
Any questions? Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. It's powerful testimony. I think next up is Michael O'Brien. Is Michael still here? Nope. How about Susan Romier? Susan here? All right. And I think that's all the speakers I had listed, so we certainly don't want to cut anyone off. We want everybody to have a chance to speak, but we are kind of getting toward the end of our allotted time, so if there's anybody else who wants to speak, let us know, but you're up.
Thank you. I'm Susan Rohrmeyer. I'm a parent. I'm Vice President of PTSA, Parent Teacher Student Organization. I'll leave you my brochure. Never travel without them. I went to John King's assembly at Speckenkill High School, and it was a very raucous evening. He was very surprised that the parents and teachers were not on the same planet. I believe his intentions are good, that he wants to make a curriculum that advances the children in our state and in our country. But the fact is that we have a very strong curriculum in our school district and in many, many districts in New York State. And the way that this was implemented caught everyone so by surprise, especially the students. I have two children. I have a son who is in 10th grade. He's 15 years old. And I have a second son who's in 6th grade. He's 11. They are having radically different school experiences. The 10th grader has gone through, he only has 2 more years to go, with the curriculum that our school had designed under great leadership with wonderfully gifted teachers. He's almost out, but he's in a sea change here. He's currently taking a geometry class with an excellent teacher who has implemented Common Core standards. And he went to her and he said, he's beyond the material, he's gone through the book, he's ready for more. Can she take him aside and advance him? And she said there is no way she can get the 80 students she has through Common Core with the hours she has in the year. There's no way she can get the kids through the material that she has. There's no way she can take any time to take him further. So for him, there's no rigor. The rigor is gone. And for my younger son, who hasn't had Common Core until this year as a 6th grader, he is now entrenched in testing. He is not anxious about it, he doesn't mind it, but it has taken away so much of the fun of school. The teacher who had the class do skyscrapers has left. The teacher who had the kids dress up as their favorite inventor or historical figure and then had recorded their live biographies has gone. The teacher who was there every night till 6 o'clock, carefully and with beautiful script, commenting on all the papers, has left. He was gone in the summer. He took an opportunity and left. So I feel for everyone, every parent and child and administrator, for this being brought in under siege, and I feel very badly for the parents who have children with special needs. I feel very badly. But my children who are in regular curriculum and who would like to advance, they're having the same problem. The curriculum is not where they should be. They're not common. No child is common, but they're being asked to do the work with a lot of homework. They have hours and hours of homework and with a lot of testing, which isn't fun for them. And they are hearing that kindergartners are coming into school and being tested in library, gym, and art, and that some of them are crying. They are hearing that their fellow students are so upset that they're opting out of the tests, and they're being made to sit in the library, and then the second day of testing, they're being asked to go again to the test, to please take the test. They have to be resistors at an age when they've been taught to respect their elders and listen to their teachers and parents. And it's really asking a lot of them. And I don't think my own children have the muscle to do it, because they don't mind the test, they mind the tears. I think that sums up my feeling as a parent. So our family respectfully requests the withdrawal of Common Core curriculum from New York State programming.
Any questions? You have anything?
Just a big thank you. Thank you. I think part of the challenge is what we're seeing is collateral damage. So we're hearing these stories across endless school districts. So So thank you for your conviction. Thank you for coming.
Yep, and I just want to point something you made reference to about those teachers leaving, and it's not a coincidence that you're talking about creative things that they did in the classroom that they feel they can't do anymore. And that's one of the biggest problems with this for our teachers, is a lot of that creativity of trying to find certain ways to reach their students and make learning fun is gone. And, you know, we're in danger of basically, earlier speakers talked about the modules and how they're scripted and everything else, and, you know, perhaps that's the goal, is to have a script that maybe we can, you know, throw a robot up in front of the room rather than a human being, and, you know, and then we can treat the children like robot test takers, and we can whistle all along and pat ourselves on the back when we, you know, have some rigged test scores that go up. So it's a scary thing. Thank you for pointing it out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
The other thing, too, is, if I could bring up, one of the other things I've heard, the implementation of this is different from school district to school district. All right, it's not like an even rollout. Everybody's doing it differently. There's no guidance here. And we were fortunate enough to have some teachers, you know, one of the things that's heart-wrenching is we had teachers that came up and weren't planning on speaking. And what they said was, I'm putting my job in jeopardy here, all right? And I was afraid to speak, but I can't sit here and not say something. And we had other teachers telling us that they had to stay with the curriculum. And what they did is, there were a couple books that, I mean, it was a 1/4 inch thick, and they're spending 5 months on the book, all right? And the children are going, enough, I read the whole thing, just let us move on. And it's like, finally, there were a couple teachers that pushed it to the side and just started teaching other things to engage the child. But it felt like when they were testifying to us is, you know, the kid that's up in his bedroom, putting a blanket over his head and reading, you know, when he's supposed to be sleeping, trying to hide from his parent. And I've got teachers doing that. I have teachers that are afraid to teach. I just think that the rollout of this has just been so bad. And I think that the teachers that haven't been involved in this, and we keep going back and looking at it, and I just don't think I see anything positive in this. You know, if anybody has the opposite opinion of this, please let me know. You know?
I'm only lying.
Yeah. But, you know, I just wanted to bring that up. You know, what we have is, it's one size fits all, and it's not fitting anybody. So, you know, thank you very much for everybody who spoke to me.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for the invitation this evening. And I'll be brief, and I apologize for my lateness. I'm going to apologize for my departure because my youngest one wants me to pick her up from school. She's still there tonight right now. But it's important to know, and I guess because I'm the only Democrat up here, you should know this. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue about our children. It's about our teachers. It's about our education system. It's not about politics. It's about making sure that we provide the best opportunity for our children, but we do it in a very sensible format. My quick expressions, and we have all been spending the last 4 or 5 months many forums, many seminars, some informal in school libraries, some larger ones in auditoriums like this. It was too much too soon. The concepts sound good, but we need to be able to give the resources to our teachers to do what they do best, which is to inspire our children, to educate our children. We should not have our children going home at night in pain from what they suffered through the day, nor terrified, as one mother was explaining, about what they have to endure the next day. And at the same time, there's been a very, very large opportunity lost here to provide the best opportunity for our children with disabilities. That is something that most of us have signed on and requested the commissioner to conduct hearings on that community as well, because that voice is not being heard as well. and I expect to have a response within the next couple days. I've been told that. So rest assured, there are many hot topics burning as we go back into the legislative session, but this one will be on the front burner in both houses and with the governor to make some changes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for being here. And John's right, it's certainly a bipartisan issue. We had Pat Fahey up here earlier as well, and it cuts across liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. It doesn't matter. It's about the kids, and that's a good thing to see, because it is nice when we can act in a bipartisan way down there. Now we just have to make the changes necessary. Ed, do you have anything final to say?
Really, one thing that I've been trying to, just say in conclusion at a lot of these, if you have any doubts that the speakers and everything we've heard everywhere else in the state would echo your own, they do. It's been the same type of stories that we've heard, all of them unique, yet all of them very similar in their frustration on behalf of their own children, on behalf of their students, the teachers, on behalf of administrators and people running our schools, that their hands are being tied from the state and federal level. And like Al said earlier, this is something that we intend to continue to push. We're going back into session in a few weeks, and I guess maybe a few months ago when we did our first forum, I think it was the first week in October, and maybe I was a little naive at that time, that I was hopeful that in the ensuing couple of months that we wouldn't be in session, because we were out of session until January, that perhaps the regents, who was due to meet 3 more times in 2013 at that point, would take some action. Now there's been some discussion and things going on, and they're going to appoint a committee now to look at things, and I very much hope that committee is representative of these voices and includes some of the people who have started to speak out. I hope it includes all of the people who started to speak out, because, like I said earlier, they have a lot of great experience to talk on this issue. But, I thank Steve and Pete and Jim Tedesco and all of my colleagues who have had us up here, and, they're my colleagues on the Education Committee as well. And we've been pushing this issue throughout the state, and it's because of, like Al said, the parents, the teachers, everybody that comes out, that this has continued to be an issue. Many people have ignored things that they've heard from politicians. That's easy to do, but it's very hard to ignore what you hear from parents and teachers speaking passionately about our children. So I thank all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, I would, again, encourage you to stay with us. This is a test of endurance, and it's a test of will, and it's a test of bureaucracy, and from what we've been hearing from our speakers, of others who have other agendas that are not in sync with what we know is best for our children and our families, from the grassroots, from our homes, our communities. So I encourage you to stay with it. As you heard from Ed is from Long Island as well, and so whether it's the North Country, Buffalo, Syracuse, Southern Tier, people are saying the same thing. So the issue is we have to maintain ourselves, be disciplined, and keep the pressure up. So I would thank you again for helping educate us as we move forward into the legislative session. Thank you.
Message received. Thank you. And to the panel here tonight, and Steve and the whole team here, thank you for organizing it. And we go forward together from here. Thank you.
And I would just like to thank everyone for being here tonight and taking the time. Certainly heartfelt words and comments. You can hear the pain, the frustration, and just know that we're listening. It is not falling on deaf ears. I think we're reaching the point here where I think the people in New York are saying enough is enough, and they want this fixed. And I would hope that the regents are listening, and that the governor is listening, and that both houses of the legislature listen. The one thing we heard, and I've said many times, in fact, I had this poster printed for a reason over here. That's Scotty, and Scotty is a special needs child on Long Island, and his mother sent me that picture, and she sent me a pretty long message. And I told her that Scotty would be present here with us tonight. We heard a lot about special needs kids. They cannot be forgotten, but those children are not common. No child is common, special needs or not. They are all unique. They are all gifted individuals in their own way. And to commonize our education is exactly the wrong thing to do. I think what is the right thing to do is get out of the way and let the teachers teach. So on that note, I want to thank you all for coming. I hope everybody was able to get their voices out, and thank you for taking the time with us. Thank you. God bless.
Well done, Steve.